The House will be in order. The prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Thank you, God, for giving us another day. As the difficult work of governing now resumes, bless the members of this assembly with wisdom, patience, and goodwill as they tackle the ongoing issues challenging our nation. We thank you again for the inspiration of our nation's founders and the legacy they left us with. May the members of this assembly and all Americans be worthy of that legacy. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson.
I will ask all the members in the gallery to stand and join me in the pledge of allegiance to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. I write to inform you officially that effective January 24, 2017, ahead of being sworn in as California's Attorney General, I will resign from my office as the representative of the 34th Congressional District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. It has been a distinct honor to serve the people of Los Angeles and my country in Congress for more than 24 years. I'm eternally grateful for my constituents for their tremendous counsel and support over the 2 decades. I leave my work in Congress with mixed emotions. The People's House has been home to some of America's greatest patriots and talent. I have learned from them and been fortunate to have had a chance to add my grains of sand, as we say in Spanish, to build a better America. In service to my country, I will always look for the best way to make the biggest difference for our people. Working as Attorney General on behalf of more than 39 million Americans in California, the 6th most vibrant economy in the world, will give me the chance to fight for all Americans to share in the forward-leaning values and opportunities that have made California so great. I hereby submit my resignation from the House of Representatives. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues in Congress in the future to the betterment of our great nation. Signed, Mr. Becerra, Member of Congress.
Under Clause 5D of Rule 20, the chair announces to the House that in light of the resignation of the gentleman from California, Mr. Becerra, the whole number of the House is 433. The chair will now entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
I ask you to unanimously address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, our nation is clearly divided. The division was displayed when a group of students from Marion High School in my district came to Washington for the inauguration weekend. On the way back to their hotel on Saturday night, a group of protesters surrounded their bus, threw projectiles through the windows, and painted the bus. Imagine that, a group of history students coming 13 hours across this great nation and wanting to participate in the peaceful transfer of power only to be intimidated. Free speech is essential to our democracy. However, acts of violence and intimidation have no place. Now is the time. Now is the time that both parties move to get past this political division that is going through this country. Thanks, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oregon seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Whoa. Dude's been here. Well, I remember the bad old days of health insurance before the Affordable Care Act. They could refuse to sell you a policy if you'd ever been sick. They could refuse to renew your policy if you got sick. Oh, and they had another thing called rescission, where they could put a group of examiners on you and try and take away your policy if you got sick, and this happened numerous times due to technicalities. They can't do those things anymore. They had a cap on your benefits. If you had a really expensive disease, oh, sorry, your benefits are exhausted. You just go die now. So those things are gone. But if they totally repeal the Affordable Care Act, they're likely to come roaring back. But the Republicans say competition will take care of that. The problem is there's no competition in the insurance industry. They are exempt from antitrust law. They can and they do collude to set rates, to redline people, to decide what states they'll sell policies in. Therefore, today, I am introducing the Health Insurance Fair Competition Act. It would subject the health insurance industry to the same laws that apply to every other industry in America except for professional sports, who are exempt from antitrust law. This is a common sense solution. If they're going to rely on competition, we need competition. There won't be any unless we take away their antitrust exemption. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, this Congress must keep our promises to the American people. Our first responsibility is to institute policies that will grow our economy and create jobs. For 8 years, Americans looking for work have suffered while the regulatory state sucked nearly $2 trillion out of our economy. We must rescind these burdensome regulations and enact a common-sense approach to regulations. Obamacare has failed, and it's time to repeal and replace it with a patient-driven plan that incorporates free market-based principles. We have to repeal the mandates and taxes of Obamacare and make sure no one falls through the cracks. Finally, we have to reform our tax code. It is far too long and complicated. We have to cut the tax rates to a maximum of 15 to 20%. These policies will jumpstart the American economy from a stagnant growth rate to more than 4% GNP growth rate. Only a vibrant economy can provide for a strong national security and robust infrastructure capable of supporting jobs. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Okay. Madam Speaker, I rise to voice my strong opposition to the current efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Nearly 20 million Americans have gained access to health care because of the Affordable Care Act, including nearly 1.5 million Floridians. Because of the ACA, over 278,000 children in Florida have gained health care coverage, and 132,000 young adults in Florida have been able to remain on their parents' health insurance plan until they reach age 26. As women in Florida and across this nation can now purchase health insurance for the same price as men because of the ACA ban on gender rating. Repealing the law could endanger the health and welfare of hundreds of thousands of Floridians and their families. Repealing the ACA will not only make America sick again, but it will threaten the economic security of every American. I will not stand by and allow my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to dismantle the ACA and threaten the health and economic security of millions of hardworking Americans. Madam Speaker, I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, this past week, our community lost a dedicated leader and a friend. Dick Bernick, the patriarch of the third generation to run family-owned Bernick's companies, passed away after an incredible life. Bernick's Companies is a Minnesota success story. This past year, Bernick's and the Bernick family reached an amazing milestone with the 100th anniversary celebration of the business. Dick played a huge role in that success by guiding and growing the family business through good and financially difficult times. Dick Bernick's life was an American success, not just because of his business, though, but because his life was filled with family, friends, and service to the community he so loved. Dick gave so much to the St. Cloud community. In fact, his company continues to donate a percentage of its profits back to different charities and organizations in the communities that Bernick serves. We send our sincere condolences to Dick's wife, Lila, his children, and the rest of his family. We hope that you will find comfort in the fact that Dick's life and his legacy of generosity have left an indelible mark on our community and the community that he loved, and that he will always be remembered. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, it doesn't take a law degree. It doesn't take imagination. All it takes is common sense to see that President Trump's ownership and his family's operation of hotels and golf courses and rental properties is ripe for corruption. President Trump's failure to completely divest his ownership interest not only violates tradition followed by every other modern president, it's unconstitutional. The Constitution prohibits any U.S. official, including President Trump, from taking payments from foreign governments. His ongoing involvement in the Trump Organization will let foreign governments funnel payments to his businesses. Foreign operatives will try to curry favor with the administration with no accountability to the American people. When he took the oath of office last week, President Trump swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Sadly, his refusal to cut his business ties has broken that vow in these very first days of his administration. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in memory of Ruth Samuelson, a longtime leader in the North Carolina House of Representatives and a former member of the Mecklenburg County Commission. Ruth is now in heaven following a courageous battle with ovarian cancer. Ruth infused her faith in God in all aspects of her family, political, personal, and civic life. Because of her vibrant faith and commitment to focusing on what truly matters, Ruth was known as a thoughtful mediator throughout her tenure in the North Carolina House, someone who approached tense partisan issues with grace, yet never backed away from her convictions. In 2013, Ruth was in line for a top leadership role, but instead she walked away, choosing instead to focus on her passions of family, faith, and philanthropy. Ruth's last public statement was, quote, "I want people to know that God is my good friend," end of quote. May the Lord bring comfort to her husband, Ken, to her children, Bobby, David, Joy, and Alex, and her 4 grandchildren, and the countless lives that she touched. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of every woman's right to make her own informed decisions about her health, including access to family planning and reproductive health care. While the rest of the world moves forward, we are turning the clock back to the era of madmen. However, unlike President Trump and my Republican colleagues, I have heard the voices of hundreds of thousands of people I marched with last Saturday. I accept the overwhelming research opposing the outrageous policies that President Trump and the Republicans in Congress have placed at the center of their agenda. Policies like the global gag rule and H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for abortion. These dangerous and irresponsible policies are a disgraceful attack on women's rights domestically and throughout the world. Let's get this straight, Madam Speaker. What this is about is keeping low-income women from accessing the health care they so rightfully deserve. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to speak in support of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Mr. Speaker, barring the use of certain federal funding for abortion is not a new concept. The Hyde Amendment has more or less called for this ban for 40 years. But the Hyde Amendment is not permanent. It must be reintroduced every year for it to go into effect. As such, it has been reformed from time to time, and sooner or later, I believe, it will cease to be implemented. So it is time to make the Hyde Amendment permanent law. It is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, this bill we're debating is not about man versus woman. It is not about liberal versus conservative. H.R. 7 is not about taking away the rights of a woman. It is about protecting the rights of the unborn. Because at the end of the day, that is what this comes down to. Who knew something so obviously and so morally right would be so controversial? I ask my colleagues to support this bill as we protect the lives of those who cannot speak for themselves. In God we trust. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today I rise in opposition to H.R. 7, the latest attack on women's reproductive rights. Today's bill comes on the coattails of the new administration yesterday, reinstating the global gag rule, which limits women's reproductive health care outside the U.S. And all of this after 3.2 million women and men across the country participated in the Women's March last Saturday. The march sent a clear message that this administration should not undermine women's rights and women's health care. And this is the response to undermine women's reproductive health care? Well, Madam Speaker, the people of our country, they are watching. They are showing up. They are paying attention. And they will not back down in the face of attempts to move this country backwards. And I urge my colleagues to oppose H.R. 7. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker,
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While it might be raining lately in California, we still need additional water supply infrastructure to meet the needs of agriculture and a growing population. Sites Reservoir is the only project in California that will improve water supply for cities, farms, as well as the environment. If Sites Reservoir were already in place today, California would have an estimated additional 600,000 acre-feet of water stored so far this winter, in addition to similar amounts from last year and even water that could have been impounded during the high flows during the drought years. Had we had this infrastructure in place, we'd have enough water to supply 4.8 million Californians for an entire year just on this winter's flows, and the winter isn't even over yet. Sites Reservoir will not only capture enough high winter flow, but also allows the reuse of water released currently from Lake Shasta so that human and environmental water use are no longer mutually exclusive. Madam Speaker, let's not lose this opportunity to conserve water and not be delayed again and again and again. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. I speak for my constituents of the 9th Congressional District of New York and women across the nation when I say that H.R. 7 is not only dangerous, but it is misleading and would be detrimental to women's health everywhere. This bill not only creates barriers for women who want to access abortion care, but it unfairly targets low-income women with an, in particular, disproportionate effect on women of color who are more likely to live below the poverty level and become eligible for Medicaid. Additionally, it penalizes small businesses who want to provide comprehensive health care coverage to their employees, including reproductive health care. Let's not punish the single mother who recently left her abusive husband, has no money, no job, no health insurance, except for Medicaid to receive the abortion care and services she desperately needs. Let's not punish the young woman suffering from cancer who will live and whose life will be in danger if she can't access an abortion. This past weekend, millions of women and men across the country and including myself, marched with one goal in mind: to let the world know that our rights must be respected and protected. A woman's right to abortion should be a personal choice that she makes, not a decision that government makes for her. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I come to the floor to ask my colleagues to support H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. H.R. 7 codifies policies enacted for more than 30 years on a case-by-case basis that prohibit federal funding of abortion, including the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits funding for elective abortion coverage through any program funded through the annual Labor, Health, and Human Services Appropriations Act. The Smith FEHBP amendment, which prohibits funding for health plans that include elective abortion coverage for federal employees. The Dornan amendment, which prohibits the use of congressionally appropriated funds for abortion in the District of Columbia, and the restrictions on elective abortion funding through the Peace Corps and federal prisons. I encourage my colleagues to support H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, look at this picture. Where are the women? Yesterday, the President signed an executive order affecting and restricting health care for millions of women across the world, while no woman was president. Clearly, he did not hear the voices of the millions of women who marched for their rights and for their health care this past weekend. Reinstating the global gag rule will cut off funding for global health care organizations that offer reproductive health care for women from some of the poorest and neediest countries in the world. I urge my colleagues to join me in opposing the global gag rule and any other assault on women's rights in America or around the world.
Gentlelady yields back her time. For what purpose does this gentlelady from Florida rise? Without objection, the gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, January 28th marks the 58th anniversary of the founding of La Rosa Blanca, or as it's known in English, the White Rose. Founded by Rafael Diaz-Balart, the White Rose is an important organization dedicated to opposing Castro's communist tyranny, offering a blueprint for Cuba's future reconstruction, promoting democracy and freedom, and preparing for the day that Cuba will finally be returned to the people of Cuba. These ideas are embodied in the White Rose Institute, a nonprofit started by Rafael's son, my dear friend and legislative brother, Lincoln Diaz-Balart. The White Rose Institute will honor 2 Cuban leaders who have come to embody Rafael's ideas, Jorge Luis Garcia Perez Antunes and Felicia Guillén Amador, bravely fighting the Castro dictatorship for even the most basic of human rights. Antunes, Felicia, and those like them are the real future of Cuba, a future without the Castro's dictatorship, without the brutal repression, a future, as Rafael and the White Rose envisioned, of freedom, sacred freedom. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady's time expired. For what purpose does my new colleague from Illinois seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For millions of Americans, home ownership stands as a source of personal and economic security and a defining part of the middle-class life. Earlier this month, under President Obama, the Federal Housing Administration announced a plan to make mortgages more affordable for nearly 1 million working and middle-class families buying their first homes. In his first hours in office, President Trump reversed President Obama's plan with an executive action costing Americans an average of $500 more per year to get a mortgage. Experts project that 40,000 families who would have bought homes can no longer do so. The Trump administration's order to make mortgages more expensive will not strengthen our economy. It will not create jobs. It will not make America great again, but it will make life harder for working families. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
I ask for unanimous consent to address the body for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to celebrate National School Choice Week. Allowing parents to choose the best educational outcomes for their children gives every child a better chance to succeed and prepares students for their future. School choice has greatly benefited Arizona, from charter schools to vocational schools to private school scholarships to education savings accounts. I am grateful that my state is a national leader in diverse school choice programs. Arizona's Scholarship Tax Credit Program gives taxpayers a dollar-for-dollar tax credit to enable low-income and disabled children to attend private schools. In Arizona, more children per capita attend exemplary charter schools, and indeed some of the best charter schools in the country. We have significantly expanded the education savings account model so students can receive the best education possible that meets their unique needs, including tribal families living in reservation communities. Arizona recognizes that all children are unique. They learn differently, and each child should have the opportunity to attend the school that will help them learn to love learning and succeed. I hope other states will look at Arizona's example as they expand school choice. I am pleased President Trump has made school choice a priority by nominating Betsy DeVos to lead the Department of Education. And thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I have unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise an extended recess.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me share with you and the members an Affordable Care Act story from Gwyneth Packard, from my hometown of Bourne, Massachusetts. Gwyneth contacted me to tell me about her uncle, Wayne Dickinson. You know, it was Thanksgiving 2015, and Wayne went to see his doctor because he wasn't feeling well. His doctor ran some tests, and the next day, Wayne received a call, an unnerving call, asking him to come back in. Before he could make the next appointment, Wayne's insurance provider called his employer to inform the company that their rates would be going up because one of their employees had cancer. Wayne had been a computer technician at his company for 18 years, and his boss knew he hadn't been feeling well, and it wasn't hard for them to figure out which employee was the cause, since Wayne was the only one that was sick. At work the next day, Wayne's boss called him into the office and said he was laying him off because his company couldn't afford the new premium. Thankfully, Wayne was able to purchase coverage through the insurance exchange. Wayne saw his doctor, got his official diagnosis, began formulating a plan, and because he was able to purchase health care, even with pre-existing conditions, Wayne got the life-saving surgery he needed. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When I ran for Congress, I made a promise to hang my family's Revolutionary War musket in my office as a steadfast reminder of the reason why I'm here in Washington, to support and defend the Constitution, and honor those who have fought for the Constitution and those who continue to fight for our freedom. We must never forget how precious our constitutional rights are, and the right to bear arms is one of the most important because that right ensures our ability to defend all of our rights. As a veteran of the United States Army and a life member of the NRA, I will fight in Congress to defend our right to bear arms. It is a special honor to represent the great people of 2nd District of Florida and to fight for their conservative values in Congress. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, as the House begins consideration of H.R. 7, I rise in solidarity with the women of the world. I rise in outrage as yet another attempt to control our bodies and our access to quality care. Madam Speaker, it's my body. It doesn't belong to this House. I alone bear the burden, pain, and joy that it brings. Please stop trying to regulate my reproductive organs. They belong to me. Have you ever had a menstrual period? Have you ever felt the unbearable pain in every bone of your body during childbirth? Madam Speaker, there are millions of mothers living in inadequate public housing and trailer parks, raising their children alone. And we are here to consider anti-choice bills that restrict access to women's care. If the Republican House passes H.R. 7, will it support universal pre-care and Head Start? Will this House reform foster care and stop greasing the prison pipeline with unwanted children? It seems to me that this Republican House cares about babies right up until the minute they're born into the world, and then they disappear and desert the children forever. It's time to stop the cradle-to-grave neglect. How many more anti-choice bills we need to put on the floor before we do what's important to build a society? Madam Speaker, we need to give women and their families and their doctors the ability to make decisions for their bodies.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Leave my body alone.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank the Speaker for yielding. It is with a heavy heart that I stand here to share with you a few words about North Carolina's dear friend, Ruth Samuelson. Ruth was only 57 when she went to glory yesterday morning. Her grace in the fight against cancer was a trait that was seen in her life as a wife of 35 years to Ken, as a mom, and as a public servant. It was in this strength rooted in her Christian faith that provided her with the grace to lead and to champion causes that she held dear. And although Ruth worked in the often divided world of politics, she garnered respect from all sides. This week, we will discuss an issue that was very dear to Ruth, the right to life. She fought hard for the lives of the unborn with heart and compassion that earned admiration for all. Her grace and leadership will forever continue to inspire all that she encountered. With that, I would like to end with a passage of significance to Ruth and her husband Ken. It's from Matthew 6, chapter 6, verse 33. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. We will miss you, Ruth, but we know that you have been added to the kingdom. And with that, I yield my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Michigan seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to speak against H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion and Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act. We are here to represent all of our constituents, even the ones we don't agree with. And it should be the woman alone who makes the decision, not Republicans, not Democrats, not the Trump administration, no one but the woman and her doctor. I support choice, so every woman in America can make the decision that's right for her, her family, her God, and her health and her reproduction. Creating access issues and removing coverage does not stop abortions, it drives them underground. H.R. 7 essentially creates a disparity between poor women and rich women. For women, children, foster youth, for LGBT community, for the middle class, working class, poor.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, advising extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, this week marks National School Choice Week, an opportunity to recognize the importance of providing families choice in education. As the husband of a retired school teacher and the grateful father of 4 sons and 8 grandchildren, I know firsthand the benefit of school choice. We should strive for education that recognizes the individual needs of our students. Last week, I was appreciative to visit schools to experience school choice at work. I visited charter school, public school, and homeschool group. Thank you to Mark Brown, principal of Horse Creek Academy in Aiken, to Dr. Bill Kuhn, principal of Meadow Glen Middle School in Lexington, and Wendy Hoyle, the president of the Aiken Area Home Educators. You make a remarkable difference for students. And I believe that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos will make a very positive difference in the tradition of Education Superintendent Molly Spearman of South Carolina. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from North Carolina seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute. Madam
Without
Speaker.
objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise today to express my opposition to H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. A woman's right to choose shouldn't depend upon her location, her income, or insurance. Just 2 days since the 44th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, and Republicans are once again attacking women's health care. This legislation would prevent federal funds from being spent on health benefits that include abortion coverage, causing women and families who depend on ACA to lose their coverage. A woman who can't afford an abortion and who needs one should not be stripped of her constitutionally protected right to one because of her insurance. We've got to stand up, fight for our sister's right to choose and her right to control her own body. It's not the federal government's business, it's personal. It's my business, and I'll continue to challenge any attempt to infringe upon women's rights and strongly encourage my colleagues to join me in protecting that right. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Wyoming seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 55 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 5, House Resolution 55, resolved that upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 7 to prohibit taxpayer-funded abortions. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the majority leader and the minority leader or their respective designees. And 2, 1 motion to recommit.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, during consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. I now yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of House Resolution 55, which provides a closed rule for consideration of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion and Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act. This bipartisan bill will codify and make permanent what is commonly referred to as the Hyde Amendment and expand Hyde Amendment restrictions to all federal agencies. First offered in 1976, the Hyde Amendment prevents taxpayer dollars from being used to fund abortions through government programs like Medicaid. These restrictions have been maintained for more than 40 years through the annual appropriations process, including the most recent continuing resolution passed last December. It is time that these important protections against the use of taxpayer funding to pay for abortion be made permanent. A GAO report in 2014 found that under Obamacare, over 1,000 insurance plans covered elective abortion. Those plans are purchased with taxpayer subsidies. H.R. 7 would stop this and make Obamacare conform to the Hyde Amendment. If the Hyde Amendment had been applied to Obamacare, as President Obama promised it would be, the number of federally subsidized plans with elective abortion coverage would have been 0. As we work to repeal and replace the deeply flawed Obamacare, we need to ensure taxpayer subsidies are not used to pay for abortion coverage. According to a Marist poll conducted last July, 62% of respondents, a majority of the women asked, and including 45% of those who identify as pro-choice, do not support taxpayer funding for abortions. H.R. 7 simply codifies and makes permanent a protection against the use of taxpayer funding for abortion that the majority of Americans, and certainly a majority of my constituents in Wyoming, support. Therefore, I urge support for the rule to allow consideration of H.R. 7 and reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, and I want to thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for extending the customary 30 minutes. I
ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks, and
Without
I yield
objection.
myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, first of all, I rise in opposition to this yet another closed rule. Last night in the Rules Committee, there were 3 thoughtful amendments that were brought forward. They were all germane, all comply with the rules of the House, and yet once again, the Republicans in the Rules Committee denied each and every one of them. There is no opportunity for any amendments to be heard here today, no opportunity for there to be a real debate. And I regret that very much, and again, that is the trend that we see in this Congress. And Madam Speaker, I also oppose the underlying bill. Madam Speaker, I have a fundamental belief that politicians in Washington should not have the right to interfere in the health decisions of a woman. And this deceptively titled bill will do just that. It continues this Republican majority's never-ending crusade against women, and it's an attempt to take away the constitutionally protected right to abortion services for millions of women, especially middle-class and lower-income women. That is wrong. Madam Speaker, these health care decisions should be made between women and their doctors, not politicians in Washington. Who the hell are we in this chamber to make these private and oftentimes painful decisions for women? Republicans claim that this bill is about codifying the Hyde Amendment, which has been around for 4 decades. That's 40 years too long, in my opinion. But this bill isn't really about the Hyde Amendment. Despite what Republicans claim, this extreme and sweeping bill would go even further by placing unprecedented limits on women's access to reproductive health services, even if they want to pay for abortion coverage out of their own pockets. Placing restrictions on how women with private insurance can spend private dollars when purchasing health insurance would radically change our nation's long-standing policy. It is deeply troubling and must not become law. Madam Speaker, just days ago, during the nationwide Women's March, millions of people gathered all across the country and around the globe to defend women's rights. These marches were likely the single largest day of protests in American history. More than 500,000 people took to the streets right here in our nation's capital, and I was proud to march with these dedicated men and women along with my wife and my daughter. My son, I'm also proud to say, joined the march in Boston. The marches were peaceful, not a single arrest reported in Washington, D.C., and they were also clear, sending a message to each of us that women's rights are human rights. But far from respecting those rights, the majority is here today attacking a woman's constitutional right to make her own decisions about her health, her family, and her future. Despite this dangerous bill passing the Republican-controlled House in previous Congresses, it has traditionally died in the Senate, and I hope the Senate keeps with that tradition. The ultimate goal of congressional Republicans and of Donald Trump is to overturn Roe v. Wade. Make no mistake about it. They want to take us back to the days of back-alley abortions where women lost their lives. That would be an awful thing to do. And I hope people who believe in upholding a woman's right to choose are watching this debate. And I hope that they are just as outraged as I am by this attempt to roll back women's health care rights. I hope they call their representatives in Congress today to speak out. This is a time for action, and we need all of you to make your voices heard. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Dr. Fox.
The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for yielding time. Madam Speaker, our colleague on the other side of the aisle said, who the hell are we to be here speaking on this legislation and passing this legislation? Well, Madam Speaker, we're the representatives of the people of this country. Madam Speaker, the most conservative estimates show that we've lost 54 million children to abortion since 1973. 54 million children. In a nation founded upon principles that recognize the dignity of every human life, we should not tolerate this extermination of innocent lives. The majority of Americans recognize this tragedy for what it is, and there's consensus among them that they do not want their taxpayers paying for a practice they sincerely oppose, and we are their representatives. Since 1976, the Hyde Amendment's been included in relevant appropriations bills to prohibit federal funding of abortions. Each year, it's been consistently renewed and supported by congressional majorities and presidents of both parties. Estimates from the Congressional Budget Office indicate that the Hyde Amendment has prevented hundreds of thousands of abortions each year. That means millions of Americans are alive today because of the Hyde Amendment. After 40 years, it's time for this life-saving amendment to become permanent law. H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, makes the Hyde Amendment and other current abortion funding prohibitions permanent and government-wide. This common-sense measure restores a long-standing agreement that protects the unborn and prevents taxpayers from being forced to finance thousands of elective abortions. For these reasons, I urge my colleagues to vote to respect our nation's consensus on abortion funding and affirm life by voting in favor of this rule and H.R. 7. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady from Wyoming reserves, and the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 1/2 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Kennedy.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a few days ago, I stood immersed in a sea of women, of men, and of children of all colors, creeds, and backgrounds. Citizens who fiercely believe that the diversity of their opinions anchor, that they do not undermine, the values that we share, and that their personal activism and unique advocacy could be traced back to one collective guiding principle: equality. As hundreds of thousands of people swarmed this Capitol, Boston Common, town greens from Wilton, New Hampshire to Newport, Oregon, they sent a clear message to their government that when you treat any of us as less, you threaten all of us. And that is what this bill does. It tells women across this country that their health can be compromised, that constitutionally guaranteed means something different to them than it does to men. And if this was a simple attempt to limit a woman's legal right to an abortion or reproductive health care, that would be bad enough. But it's more than that. Combined with yesterday's reinstatement of the global gag rule, this bill crystallizes the fact that our new GOP-led government sees a women's health care as expendable, both within and far beyond our borders. Make no mistake, my colleagues continue down this path, I know that there will be a few million men, women, and children willing to keep marching. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I would just note that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have referred several times now to the massive turnout for the Women's March here. And we ourselves will be having, I'm sure, a very large turnout this week, as well as I'd like to point out that that Women's March excluded groups that were pro-life women's groups. And so the notion that somehow it was reflective of all women in this nation is fundamentally misleading. Now, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 5 minutes of my time to the gentleman from New Jersey, the co-sponsor of this bill, who's done tremendous work, Mr. Smith.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady for yielding, and I want to thank her for her leadership, for being one of the prime co-sponsors of the bill, H.R. 7, along with Ms. Black, Ms. Fox, Mrs. Wagner, Mrs. Blackburn, Mrs. Nome, Mrs. Hartzler, and all the others who have joined in as sponsors of this life-saving legislation. I'd also like to thank Speaker Ryan, Majority Leader McCarthy, Whip Scalise, and Conference Chair Kathy McMorris Rogers for their extraordinary leadership in defending the most innocent and the most vulnerable among us, unborn children, as well as providing protections for their mothers, and for bringing this legislation, H.R. 7, to the floor. 40 years ago, Madam Speaker, Congress enacted the Hyde Amendment, a law that continues to this day to proscribe federal Medicaid funds from being used to subsidize abortion in most circumstances. More than 20 peer-reviewed studies show that more than 2 million people are alive today, 2 million, because of the Hyde Amendment. 2 million people who would have been aborted instead survived because public funds were unavailable to effectuate their violent demise, while their mothers benefited from prenatal health care and support. 2 million survivors who have had the opportunity to live and to enjoy the most basic and most elemental of all human rights, the right to life. Madam Speaker, we are experiencing a megatrend in America, consistently reflected in polling data, including the most recent polling data for the Marist poll yesterday. And that showed that 61% of Americans are against public funding for abortion, and most want, even those who identify as pro-choice, more restrictions to protect the innocent unborn. People are seeing the truth of who abortion actually destroys, as today's proudly shared first baby pictures are most often of ultrasound imaging photos depicting the amazing miracle of the developing child in the womb. Growing numbers of Americans are often shocked to learn that the methods of abortion include dismemberment of a child's fragile body, including decapitation and the severing of arms and legs, or the use of drugs like RU-46 that literally starve the child to death before forcibly expelling her or him from the safety of the womb. Yet the billion-dollar abortion industry continues to cleverly market the cheap sophistry of choice while going to extraordinary lengths to cover up, ignore, and trivialize the battered victim child in the womb. Madam Speaker, pro-life Americans struggle for the day when abortion violence will be replaced by compassion and empathy for women and respect for the weak and most vulnerable among us, the child in the womb. They believe, as do my pro-life colleagues, that we ought to love them both, mother and child, and not fund the destruction of children through abortion. Lawmakers also need to hear the courageous voices of women who are silent no more, a rapidly expanding number of women who share the heartbreaking agony and heartbreak that they have endured after procuring an abortion. As I mentioned yesterday, there was a poll that came out, and again it found that 61% of Americans oppose taxpayer funding for abortion, and only 35% support it, which is precisely what we seek to accomplish with enactment of H.R. 7. It would make the Hyde Amendment and other current abortion funding restrictions permanent and government-wide. I would note parenthetically that soon after the Hyde was enacted in 1976, other abortion funding riders were enacted into law, and Hyde itself was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1980. In 1983, I authored the ban on funding abortion in the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program. Most must be renewed legislatively each and every year. This legislation would make it permanent. The legislation ensures that the Affordable Care Act, until repeal, conforms with the Hyde Amendment. I would remind my colleagues that just a few feet from where I stand, on September 9, 2009, and I have his speech right in front of me, the President of the United States said, and I quote, "And one more misunderstanding I want to clear up. Under our plan, no federal dollars will be used to fund abortions, and federal conscience laws will remain in place." Well, on the latter, the conscience clause remained in place, but they were just simply not enforced. And of course, we know now, as my good friend Ms. Cheney mentioned, we know that according to the GAO, because people kept saying in the early years, oh, there's no funding, public funding for abortion, so we asked GAO to look into it. They came back and said there is much, over 1,000 plans paid for abortion on demand.
If the gentleman would suspend, the gentleman's time has expired.
I thank the chair.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record an article that appeared in the Washington Post that does Obamacare provide federal subsidies for elective abortions? And it talks about the GAO report, and it basically says that those who claim that it does, they earn 3 Pinocchios. I'd like to ask unanimous
Without
consent.
objection.
Okay, thank you. And at this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Matsui.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 7. On Saturday, I joined millions of women and men and children who took to the streets and raised their voices in defense of equality. We marched because women's rights are truly human rights. We marched because women should be able to make their own choices about their own bodies. We marched because everyone deserves health care, not just the privileged few. And yet, here we find ourselves, voting on another Republican attempt to cut off reproductive health care from the people who need it the most. H.R. 7 would be devastating for all women, but would be disproportionately impact low-income families, women of color, immigrants, and young people. But we are reminded this weekend that as women, our destinies are tied together, and we will not be silent as Republicans attempt to interfere with a woman's constitutional right to choose. Women are watching. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Tennessee, Mrs. Black.
The gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the rule to provide consideration of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. This bill is quite literally the least we can do for American taxpayers and our voiceless unborn. Frankly, the fact that we're even here discussing this and that there's opposition to this bill at all really does break my heart. And it speaks to the depths of the entanglement with the big abortion industry that exists in some corners of this chamber. Because at the end of the day, you know what this bill really is about? The right to choose. We hear our friends across the aisle use the phrase a lot. But what about the other right to choose? The right of the taxpayer to choose not to pay for the practice that violates everything that they believe. That is what we are here to protect. The American people support this policy, with 6 in 10 surveyed saying that taxpayer dollars should not be used to fund abortions. And these are both pro-life and pro-choice. So today, Madam Speaker, I'm asking my colleagues across the aisle to honor the will of their constituents. I'm asking them to remember the good old Democratic rallying cry of safe, legal, and rare abortion. Obviously, abortion is not rare today, when over 330,000 abortions are performed in 1 year. If my colleagues still believe these words, they'll join us in supporting this modest solution to keep unsuspecting taxpayers off of the hook for this practice. And if they can't vote for this bill, then there is truly not a single limit on abortion that they will accept. And that is a sad commentary on the state of politics. I urge a yes vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Wyoming reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me just clarify for the record that there is no federal funding for abortion. All you have to do is read the Hyde Amendment, which has been in effect for 40 years. I don't support it, but that's the law of the land. And the majority of Americans believe abortion should be legal. So I mean, you want to talk about polls, the overwhelming number of Americans believe that abortion should be safe and legal. And I also would like to say that while my colleagues are working overtime to try to defund organizations like Planned Parenthood, it is because of Planned Parenthood and the counseling that is provided and the reproductive services that are provided at their clinics that the number of abortion and contraception, that the number of abortions have decreased in this country. Madam Speaker, I'm going to ask my colleagues to defeat the previous question. And if we do, I'm going to offer an amendment to the rule to bring up legislation, which I am happy to be a co-sponsor of, along with Ms. Eshoo, that would require sitting presidents and presidential nominees to disclose their last 3 returns. Despite the long tradition,
The The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. The gentleman may continue.
Despite the long tradition of presidents and presidential nominees disclosing their tax returns, Donald Trump has refused to release his, and his spokesperson recently said that he has no intention of doing so. The American people expect and deserve transparency, which this legislation would ensure. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record, along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question. And, Madam Speaker, between his refusal to release his tax returns and all these business conflicts of interest, this presidency is on a collision course with corruption. I urge all my colleagues to support this, to support our effort here. And to discuss our proposal, I yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshoo.
The gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my wonderful colleague from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for yielding this time to me. I rise in opposition to the rule and the underlying legislation, and I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question so that this bill that I've authored, the Presidential Tax Transparency Act, can be made in order for immediate floor debate and a vote. Now, the Presidential Tax Transparency Act would require the President and future presidential nominees of both parties to disclose their tax returns. Many Americans took for granted that this was covered by law, but what we've had is a decades-long tradition of voluntary disclosure by both Republican and Democratic nominees for the presidency. For the first time since the immediate post-Watergate era, candidate Trump and now President Trump has refused to release his tax returns to the public. Those who seek or hold the most powerful office in the world should be held to the highest standard of transparency to ensure the best interests of the American people are met. Now, tax returns provide an important basic disclosure because they contain highly instructive information, including whether the candidate paid any taxes, what they own, what they've borrowed, and from whom, whether they've made charitable donations, whether they've taken advantage of tax loopholes or offshore tax shelters. The President and his spokesperson have both recently said that he will not release his tax returns because the American people, quote, don't care. I beg to differ. The top petition on the website of the White House calls for the release of the President's tax returns, with over 300,000 signatures already on it. A Washington Post ABC News poll released last week found that 74% of the American people, including 53% of whom are Republicans, believe the President should release his tax returns. We want a conflict of interest-free President. For all of these reasons,
gentlelady would suspend the gentleman.
I urge my colleagues to reject the previous question and vote for the Presidential Tax Transparency Act.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, it's no surprise that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle would rather talk about just about anything besides the text and the substance of the rule and the bill that we will be about to consider. The transparency that's important to this debate and that's relevant for this discussion today is transparency that is in the rule and in this bill that would require that insurance companies make sure that people understand what they're purchasing and whether or not they're purchasing a plan that will in fact provide abortion coverage. I also just want to note that although there may be some in this chamber who view the Washington Post fact checker as the oracle and font of all wisdom, he got this one wrong, as he has in many cases, and in fact failed to understand that there are, as we meet here today, monthly advance payments of U.S. taxpayer funding going to insurance companies or to exchanges to pay for health insurance plans that subsidize abortion on demand. And now, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss.
Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my friend from Wyoming. And Madam Speaker, regardless of attempts from the other side to distract and derail what we are discussing, the vote today is on the permanent application of the Hyde Amendment, which would ban taxpayer dollars from being used
for abortion. The truth is, taxpayers get up and go to work every day. They work by the sweat of their brow. The majority of them find the practice of abortion to be a serious violation of their personal beliefs. And under that situation and scenario, it is unconscionable that this body would even consider taking the money of those hardworking taxpayers and using their money to fund abortion. The Hyde Amendment has traditionally maintained bipartisan support. It's been signed into law by both Democratic and Republican presidents since 1976. And in addition to that, the Supreme Court has upheld the law, doing so in 1980, ruling that regardless of the freedom recognized in Roe v. Wade to terminate a pregnancy, there is not a constitutional entitlement to use taxpayer money to finance such an act. The Hyde Amendment has saved the lives of roughly 300,000 unborn children annually. It is bipartisan. It's been upheld by the Supreme Court, and it protects taxpayers who have a conscientious objection. So I strongly encourage my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support H.R. 7 when it comes before the full House for a vote today, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
And Madam Speaker, I just would like to assure my colleague from Wyoming that we're not trying to distract when we bring up the issue of the President's tax returns, but we have no opportunity here to be heard. We have the bill before us, as I mentioned in my opening statement, it's a closed rule. It's a Putin rule, if you will, where it's their way or the highway, where no debate is allowed on alternative ideas. We had 3 thoughtful amendments brought before the Rules Committee last night, all germane, all in compliance with the House rules. They rejected all 3 of them. On the issue of the presidential tax returns, yeah, we're bringing it up because the American people want to know whether there are conflicts of interest. They don't want the White House to be known for being a place of corruption. They want our presidents to follow the rules and the laws of the land. So people want to know. But we're given no opportunity to do that. So forgive me if we take procedural motions to try to make our point, but my colleagues on the Republican side lock us out of any opportunity to be heard. The Rules Committee has become a place where democracy goes to die, I'm sad to say, and I hope that changes. At this point, I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Kildee.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend for yielding. You know, like many of us, this past Saturday I marched in Washington with millions of women across the country claiming their human rights, claiming their basic individual rights. And the previous speaker on the other side made mention of the fact that the Hyde Amendment is the law of the land and it's been upheld by the United States Supreme Court. We know, we get it. That's not what this is about. This is about going well beyond that and actually limiting what women can do, what individuals can do with their own money when acquiring health care that includes the reproductive health services that is the subject of this debate. How many times do we have to come to the floor to make the point that choices about women's health care should be made between a woman and her doctor, not somebody in Washington dictating to women what they can do with their own money and with their own bodies? You know what else is the law of the land? You know what else has been upheld by the Supreme Court almost a half a century ago? That fundamental right that women have over the determinations they make for themselves about their own bodies. That's been upheld
has expired.
By the United
the gentleman
States Supreme
from
Court
Massachusetts
as well.
reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Babin.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
And I thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming. For the past 30 years, through the Hyde Amendment, the U.S. Congress has acted to prevent taxpayer monies from being used to pay for abortions. The bipartisan Hyde Amendment has been an annual rider on the appropriations bills. But Obamacare bypassed this abortion funding prohibition, leading to the largest expansion of taxpayer funding of abortion in American history since Roe versus Wade. And that's why we desperately need to pass H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, to permanently codify the Hyde Amendment and apply it across the entire federal government. This bill will also ensure that the prohibition is not subject to annual threats, and it will close the massive loophole that was created by Obamacare. Since 1976, the Hyde Amendment has saved the lives of over 2 million babies, roughly the same number of people that live in the city of Houston, Texas, where I serve as a U.S. representative. For the sake of these 2 million people and the millions more that will be saved, we must permanently codify the Hyde Amendment's pro-life protections. Furthermore, as Obamacare presented the largest expansion of abortion since Roe v. Wade Supreme Court case, we must ensure that the Hyde Amendment covers all areas of the federal government. This will ensure that taxpayer dollars are no longer used to subsidize abortions. H.R. 7 is a critical piece of legislation that is supported by nearly 2/3 of the American people who do not want the government to be in the business of killing unborn babies. Congress must act to preserve the Hyde Amendment for posterity and to put an immediate end to the ongoing harm being done with taxpayers' money. I strongly encourage my colleagues to vote for the passage of this much-needed bill to end taxpayer funding of abortion once and for all. I want to thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady reserves, and the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, the Vice Chair of the Democratic Caucus, Ms. Sanchez.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to H.R. 7, the misnamed No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Just 2 days ago, our nation celebrated the 44th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, affirming that a woman has a constitutional right to make the decision of what is best for herself and her family. However, Republicans have been relentless in their pursuit to deny women this constitutional right, and H.R. 7 is just another reckless example. H.R. 7 will have devastating consequences on every single woman in America. The bill would deny women, families, and small businesses tax credits if they elect an insurance plan that covers abortions. The IRS would be inserted into one of the most important and private decisions a woman can make, one that should be solely between her and her doctor. That is the most egregious and offensive example of government overreach that I can think of. Mr. Speaker, women are responsible, women are smart, women know what is best for them, and women can make their own choices. Allow them to do that and vote against H.R. 7. And I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Holmgren.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming so grateful to be here to talk on this important subject. Thomas Jefferson once said, "The care of human life and happiness is not their destruction, is the first and only object of good government." It is with Jefferson's words in mind that I rise today as an original co-sponsor in support of the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion and Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act. This legislation sustains Mr. Jefferson's vision of good government. It makes permanent the Hyde Amendment, restricting federal funding for abortions and thereby ensuring the care of human life and not its destruction. Most Americans oppose the use of their tax dollars to pay for abortions. Since 1976, the Hyde Amendment saved more than 2 million unborn children and continues to save more than 60,000 lives in the United States every year. Americans also deserve to know before they purchase it if their health care plans cover elective abortion. H.R. 7 addresses the abortion secrecy clause of the Affordable Care Act. It requires qualified plans to disclose to enrollees at the time of enrollment whether a plan covers abortion. Americans should never be forced to pay for someone else's abortion. This legislation will restore the status quo on government funding for elective abortions and make this policy permanent and consistent across the federal government. I commend Congressman Smith and Congressman Lipinski for their bipartisan cooperation in introducing this bill, and I'm pleased to support it. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady reserves, and the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Davis.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me tell you about Chelsea, a mother of 2 young children who was on Medicaid when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She never missed her birth control pills, but when she went to the clinic for treatment, she was told that she was pregnant and could not get the surgery she needed because of the pregnancy. Why? Why is that? Because of the Hyde rule. Medicaid would not cover her abortion care that she needed, and her cancer treatment was delayed, obviously compromising her health. Instead of our discussing ways to make Chelsea's situation better, we are considering a bill that would make the ban on abortion care services under Medicaid permanent. This is not about asking women to get free and federally funded abortions. This is about women like Chelsea being able to receive the medical care that they desperately need. We saw this weekend where millions of women took to the streets throughout our country in a historic movement. So let's show them that we are listening by rejecting this bill that makes bad policy permanent. Madam Speaker, let's leave a woman's medical decision between her and her doctor and reject this far-reaching bill.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman reserves, and the gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler.
The gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just heartsick today to hear some of my colleagues talking about how they were celebrating the 44th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. You know, that's 60 million babies, little girls, little boys, that have been aborted and no longer have a chance to live. We could have had perhaps a cure for cancer, Alzheimer's. Who knows what the potential of those 60 million lives could have been. And so it's hard to hear my colleagues talk about a celebration of that, and then using the terminology that this bill deals with abortion care. Abortion isn't care and abortion services. It is taking a life. And this bill does nothing to change Roe versus Wade, although I wish it could. But it simply says that taxpayers do not have to participate in it. The taxpayers all across this country who believe that every life is precious, and they work hard, and they send in their money every April 15th, and they entrust it to us, their elected officials. And we have national security issues, we have roads, we have education, and they don't want to see it go to something like taking a life through abortion. So this is what we are doing today, is simply making permanent a policy that we've had to put in as an amendment to appropriations every year and fight for. And this is just making sure that here in Washington, in America, the taxpayers, we invest in women's health care. We are not investing in abortion. We should be about saving lives, not taking them. That's what this bill does, and I urge my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in opposition to the rule and the underlying bill, H.R. 7, a dangerous attack on the right of women to make their own decisions about their health and their bodies. On Saturday, I too joined the peaceful march in our nation's capital with hundreds of thousands of women and men, and millions more marched in Oregon and across the country and around the world to demand that our voices be heard. This legislation, one of the majority's first priorities under the Trump administration, won't create jobs. It will create barriers to reproductive health care for countless women. It will disproportionately affect low-income women, young women, women of color, women in rural communities, and immigrant women. This bill turns back the clock. It puts women's lives at risk. Restricting abortion does not make it go away. It makes it unsafe. This bill will drive women back to back alleys. I urge a no vote on the rule
and on H.R. 7. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
I reserve, Madam Speaker.
Gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, 44 years ago, the Supreme Court made an important decision. It said that women have a constitutional right to make decisions about their own health care and their own bodies, not the government. Now, it was just a few days ago that millions of American women marched all across the United States, reaffirming their opposition to efforts to take away their rights. And that's what this bill would do. There's been a lot of discussion about taxpayers funding abortion. That's not currently the law, not only in the Hyde Amendment, but the Affordable Care Act requires women who wish to have this coverage to pay for it themselves. We've heard a lot about alternative facts recently, but the fact is there is no taxpayer money for abortion in the United States. There hasn't ever been for many years, and that was also the accommodation that the Supreme Court made. Let's make sure that the constitutional rights of women to control their own bodies is not attacked, and I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I just want to make a point in terms of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and the constant reference to women, 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 as though all women believe what they believe. They have very strongly held views on the other side of the aisle, but the notion that somehow all women can be categorized as being pro-abortion is just simply wrong and frankly offensive to those of us who have different views. Madam Speaker, I'd like to say at this point in time that we are not making any kind of a dangerous attack on women's rights. My colleagues have accused us of being relentless. We are relentless, Madam Speaker. We're relentless in defense of the unborn, the most vulnerable among us. At this point, Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Rothfuss.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. I rise to support this rule and the underlying bill, H.R. 7. For decades, Congress has annually passed the Hyde Amendment, which has prevented any government program from funding or subsidizing elective abortion. The Hyde Amendment has saved over 2 million unborn children since 1976, including 100,000 lives in Pennsylvania. For decades, this annual restriction on taxpayer funding of abortion has been referred to as the Hyde Amendment because it was the late Congressman Henry Hyde from Illinois who sought to protect as many unborn children as he could during his service in Congress. Recollecting his own work, Congressman Hyde offered this poignant reflection. "When the time comes, as it surely will," Hyde said, "when we face that awesome moment, the final judgment, I've often thought, as Fulton Sheen wrote, that it is a terrible moment of loneliness. You have no advocates. You are there alone, standing before God. And a terror will rip your soul like nothing you can imagine. But I really think that those in the pro-life movement will not be alone. I think there will be a chorus of voices that have never been heard in this world, but are heard beautifully and clearly in the next. They will plead for everyone who has been in this movement. They will say to God, spare him because he loved us. Henry Hyde is not forgotten, and this work goes on. Despite former President Obama's promise that no abortion would be covered by his health care law, the Affordable Care Act authorized and appropriated funds for health care plans with abortion coverage. This must stop. We must remember abortion is not health care, and in no way should the government fund or subsidize the violent destruction of unborn children. It is the overwhelming opinion of Americans, including those who identify as pro-choice, that taxpayer dollars should not be used for abortion. This legislation is absolutely essential to apply the principles of the Hyde Amendment consistently across the federal government. As hundreds of thousands march this Friday on the 44th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, a decision Justice White referred to as an exercise in raw judicial power, I urge my colleagues to support this rule and the underlying bill. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 1/2 minutes to the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank my good friend from the great state of Massachusetts
for his extraordinary leadership on this issue and so many others, for standing up for women, and I thank him for the time. The right to speak is a very special one. And, Mr. Speaker, the right to choose is meaningless without the access to choose. And that is what this bill is about. It is cutting off access to choice. And that is why the anti-choice movement is so strongly behind this bill. H.R. 7 is a cynical attempt to use the federal government's power of the purse to restrict a woman's access to her constitutionally protected right to an abortion. I oppose the Hyde Amendment and believe that we should be increasing access to comprehensive health care, not reducing it. But this bill makes Hyde permanent, and it goes further. It prohibits the Affordable Care Act tax credits for individuals and employers who choose plans that cover abortion. H.R. 7 would restrict abortion coverage or make such coverage too burdensome or expensive for many Americans to afford. It's a step back towards a dark and ugly time when anti-abortion laws took a substantial toll on women's health and in many cases cost them their very lives. I urge my colleagues to join me in voting no on this rule and the underlying bill. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
You know, Madam Speaker, I'll just remind members that in order to gain votes of several pro-life Democrats needed for passage of the Affordable Care Act, President Obama issued an executive order on March 24, 2010, and it said, and I quote, "The Affordable Care Act maintains current Hyde restrictions governing abortion policy and extends those restrictions to newly created health insurance exchanges." Problem is, never happened. There were people who and are saying even today there's no taxpayer funding for abortion. Yes, there is. We finally went to the GAO. We asked them to do a study, an audit. They spent a full year on it and checked the plans that we were subsidizing with taxpayer funding abortions. I remind my colleagues that under the Hyde Amendment, plans that pay for abortion are precluded government funding. Well, there are over 1,036 plans, 1,036 Affordable Care Act exchange plans were found to have abortion on demand being paid for by the taxpayer. So if the Hyde Amendment had been applied, as the President had said he would, there would have been zero coverage for abortion except in cases of rape, incest, and life of the mother. So I yield back to my friend, and I thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
The gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank my good friend for yielding, and I stand here in a unique position. First, to oppose this sweeping attack on women's reproductive health in its entirety, but I am compelled to discuss the unique provision that singles out the District of Columbia, permanently barring the District of Columbia government from spending its own local funds, not a cent of it raised in this House, on abortion services for low-income women, thus uniquely denying the District of Columbia government the right that local and state governments exercise throughout the United States using their own local funds. Madam Speaker, H.R. 7 goes further. It insults the District of Columbia, just to make sure everybody understands that we do mean the district. It tortuously defines or redefines the term federal government. What a terrible thing to do to a local jurisdiction. To include the term District of Columbia government, so the District of Columbia government is thrown in with the federal government. We are talking about the people in the United States, the people I represent, who are #1 per capita in taxes raised to support the United States of America. This, of course, is an annual, this bill, less inclined to become law than to become part of an annual.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional minute.
Less meant to become law than to be part of the annual upcoming march. We do not intend, Madam Speaker, to let our colleagues get away with supporting democracy, including the right of local governments to spend their own local funds on choice. Everywhere on earth, supporting such a right, except for the 700,000 people who live in your own nation's capital. I thank my good friend for yielding.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, under the Constitution, all funds for the District of Columbia are appropriated by the United States Congress. So we in the Congress bear a particular and additional responsibility for funds in the District of Columbia. And I would also note, Madam Speaker, that there are no limitations in the District of Columbia on when an abortion can be performed. And therefore, if we were to lift this amendment, if we were not to have this rule in place, you could potentially have the U.S. taxpayers in a situation where they were being forced to fund even late-term abortions in the District of Columbia, which is fundamentally against the Hyde Amendment, fundamentally against everything that we have supported, and against the majority of the people in this nation. Madam Speaker, I'd now like to yield 2 minutes to the Chairman of the Rules Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, and I want to thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming not only for being on the Rules Committee, but also today for handling her first rule. Welcome to Congress and welcome to the Rules Committee. Madam Speaker, the bill that we have before us today is an extension of really bipartisan agreement that we've had for 30-plus years, that we should not have abortions that are paid for by the taxpayer. The bottom line is that this is a very difficult issue, no matter which side you might be on it. But I believe that the right thing to do is to say that based upon the morality and really the right thing, that the federal government, the taxpayers, should not be engaged in paying for abortions, killing of babies in this country. We believe it is morally wrong, and all we're simply doing today is standing up and saying we're going to extend the same privileges that we've had on a bipartisan basis for 30-plus years, not only with the Hyde Amendment, but placing that across all piece parts of appropriations and bills and things that we do here in Congress. This has absolutely nothing to do with taking away a woman's right to choice or to choose. It has nothing to do with dealing with the Supreme Court. It has everything to do with using taxpayer dollars. Yesterday, we had a very appropriate and a very timely conversation at the Rules Committee that I think both sides handled their arguments and their agreements and disagreements well yesterday. It's my hope that we do this here today. But let me say this, that the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, came up as an advocate for women, as an advocate for women who were engaged in many scurrilous trade, the trading of women, and misconduct with women, and I think he was seen for what he is. He is a strong advocate for life and for women who need to feel safe in this country, and he stood up yesterday as an advocate for saying we should not pay using taxpayer money for abortions, and that's really what this bill is. I thank the gentlewoman from Wyoming for allowing me to be here. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Wyoming reserves, and the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the Rules Committee, says that this bill has nothing to do with taking away a woman's right to choose. I would beg to differ. I think it has everything to do with taking away a woman's right to choose. But this is the rule, and I was hoping that maybe he would address the fact that, again, 3 thoughtful amendments were brought before the Rules Committee yesterday by Democrats. They're all germane. They all comply with the House rules. I was hoping he'd explain why they were all denied, especially since the bill before us didn't go through regular order. It didn't go through a committee process to be brought to the floor. This was just kind of plopped into the Rules Committee, and no amendments were made in order. That's not the way a deliberative body should be run. There are disagreements on this issue, but don't be afraid of allowing opposing viewpoints to be heard on this House floor. but apparently he didn't want to talk about that. So at this point, I'd like to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Panetta.
The gentleman is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to H.R. 7, a bill which brings permanency to the Hyde Amendment, a bill which attempts to take away low-income women's reproductive rights. Therefore, I submit to you that it is a bill more about divisive politics than decent policy. This past Saturday, I joined hundreds of my constituents on the National Mall. We demonstrated our support for reproductive rights and for women's health care across our nation. And in my district, on the Central Coast of California, we have an organization that administers those types of essential services. Marmonte Planned Parenthood provides over 60,000 preventive, reproductive, and wellness health care visits each year. And for some, that is the only health care they can get or they can afford. Madam Speaker, the Hyde Amendment isn't going anywhere, whether we like it or not. So I submit to you that it is these types of bills that do nothing to bring Congress together and everything to drive us apart, because it is bills like H.R. 7 that can harm the most vulnerable in my community and across our nation. That is why I respectfully ask my colleagues to oppose H.R. 7. Thank you. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves, and the gentlelady from Wyoming also reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today in opposition to the rule and the underlying bill, H.R. 7. 44 years ago this week, before I was even born, the Supreme Court recognized that the government has no business coming between a woman and her doctor when it comes to making personal medical decisions. Yet now, decades later, many in Washington seem determined to turn back the clock on progress on women's health and women's rights. The new administration recently instituted a rule that would limit the ability of women around the world to access accurate information about their bodies and make their own medical decisions. And now the House is considering a radical bill that would not only undermine a woman's right to make her own health care decisions, but also her ability to even choose her own health insurance plan. And on top of that, the bill would actually raise taxes on small businesses who provide their employees with access to comprehensive health coverage and impose unfair burdens on the women of the United States military. These are the facts. I will always fight back against efforts to limit choice and women's health, and that's why I strongly oppose this bill. This past weekend, we saw millions of women around the country and around the world, including hundreds in my own hometown of Wyckoff, New Jersey, where I was, rally against these backward and dangerous policies. I urge my colleagues to turn their focus from rolling back women's rights and to actually focus on getting things done for the people of this country, to creating jobs and lowering taxes. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is reserves. The gentlelady from Wyoming reserves. So the gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Can I ask the gentlelady from Wyoming how many more speakers she has?
We're prepared to close, Madam Speaker.
Well, then I will close for our side, Madam
The
Speaker.
gentleman is recognized.
Before I do, Madam Speaker, I want to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a letter from 23 faith-based organizations and communities urging members to reject H.R. 7, a letter from the American Civil Liberties Union urging members to vote no on H.R. 7, a letter from 44 women's health, religious, and other advocacy organizations strongly opposed to H.R. 7, and a letter from the American Association of University Women urging members to oppose H.R. 7.
Without objection.
And, Madam Speaker, let me begin my closing by reminding people that we're about to vote on the rule, and that the rule defines how we're going to consider this legislation. This is a closed rule. This is a Putin rule. This is a rule that allows no opposing viewpoints to be brought before this chamber, to be debated and voted on. It is completely closed. On top of that, it didn't go through regular order. Now, I know my colleagues will say, well, it went through regular order in the previous Congress, but there are 55 new members of the House in this Congress, and I think they have a right to expect regular order from the leadership of this House when legislation is brought to the floor. So the rule should be rejected because it is closed. And I would urge my colleagues, even those who may be sympathetic to the underlying legislation, to at some point stand up to your leadership and say, enough of this closed process. Open this place up a little bit. This is supposed to be the greatest deliberative body in the world, and yet we do everything but deliberate. So at some point, I hope some of my Republican colleagues will be brave enough to stand with us who are calling for a more open process. I also urge my colleagues to vote no on the underlying bill. I want to ask also unanimous consent to insert into the record an article in Politico which is entitled "Study Abortion Rates Fall to a Record Low."
Without objection.
Part of the reason for that is because women are having more access to good health care. Part of the reason why that number is getting lower is because of organizations like Planned Parenthood, which provide clinics and counseling and contraception to young women, so that we can actually avoid more people being in a situation where they have to confront the issue of abortion. And yet, my colleagues' next salvo is going to be going after Planned Parenthood. But the abortion rate in this country is going down. The underlying bill is not about making sure that taxpayer money doesn't go to fund abortion. That's what the Hyde Amendment does. And the Affordable Care Act, by the way, makes it clear that no portion of the premium tax credits may be used to pay for the portion of comprehensive health coverage that is purchased in the marketplace that relates to abortion services. That's not what this is about. This is basically the first attempt to really go after the basic constitutional right for a woman to be able to choose when it comes to abortion services. That's what this is about. The leadership of this House, indeed the President of the United States, has made it clear they want to repeal Roe versus Wade. They want to put justices in the Supreme Court who will repeal that decision. They want to pass legislation that will do everything to be able to deny women that basic right. That is what's going on here. Finally, Madam Speaker, I'm asking people to vote no on the previous question so that we can actually debate and vote on this issue of requiring presidential candidates and presidents to release their tax returns. I say to my colleagues in all sincerity, this president's refusal to release his tax returns, all these conflicts of interest that he has, this is a White House on a collision course with corruption. Donald Trump said he wanted to come to Washington to drain the swamp, but by not releasing his tax returns, by allowing all these conflicts of interest to remain, he's bringing the swamp to the White House. Enough. Let us vote for transparency here. Let us vote in a way that the majority of Americans think we ought to do, and that is to require this president to come clean, to show us what his tax returns are, to show us what he's hiding, to show us where his investments are, to show us is there any dealings with Russia or Putin or whatever. I mean, so I urge my colleagues to vote no on the previous question so we can have that opportunity to be able to debate that issue. Because if you don't vote no, I can guarantee you that the Rules Committee will never make it in order. The Rules Committee never makes anything in order that the leadership of this House doesn't put its rubber stamp on, and I think that that's unfortunate. As I said before, the Rules Committee is becoming a place where democracy goes to die. It's about time that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle stand up and say, enough, let's open this place up. With that, I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities toward the president. The gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much. I'm really heartened today, Madam Speaker, to hear so much concern from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about making sure that patients and individuals have the right to make decisions about their own health care. And I would expect then to see support from the other side of the aisle when we are in a position where we're putting in place our replacement for Obamacare. It's one of the main reasons we're repealing Obamacare, getting the government out of the business of telling people what they can and can't have with respect to their own health care. That's not the issue that we're debating here today, however, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the gentleman from New Jersey for his tireless work on this issue and for introducing this bipartisan bill. A majority of Americans across the country share the view that we must continue to work to protect the lives of mothers and their unborn children. As you've already heard, Madam Speaker, the Hyde Amendment is responsible for saving the lives of at least 2 million babies, the most vulnerable among us. Codifying a permanent restriction on the use of taxpayer funding for abortions is long overdue. I urge adoption of both the rule and H.R. 7 so we can continue to protect and save lives. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
I think the Speaker needs a hearing aid. I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, the chair will reduce to 5 minutes the minimum time for any electronic vote on the question of adoption of the resolution. This is a 15-minute vote.
And so House members are now voting on a procedural motion related to a bill that would lead to a permanent ban on federal funds allocated for abortion services, along with insurance coverage for abortions. The measure would also prohibit federal medical facilities and health professionals from providing abortion services. This topic, of course, one that the country has debated for years, also just one of the many reasons people took to the streets across the country and came here to the nation's capital last weekend for the Women's March on Washington. By the way, if you missed any coverage of that march, you can see it on our website at cspan.org. This is a 15-minute vote. We expect it to be followed by a vote on the rule for debating the bill. Members also expected later today to debate a number of suspension bills this afternoon, including provisions aimed at Energy Department research and development, setting federal guidelines for Internet access in developing countries, and USAID programs for U.S. education assistance in other countries. Again, a 15-minute vote. While the votes are coming in, we'll go to today's White House briefing. We join it live with spokesman Sean Spicer. It's just getting underway.
Held up for political reasons. The $3.8 billion pipeline, already almost 90% complete, will carry over 500,000 barrels a day of crude oil from areas in North Dakota to oil markets in the U.S. And in both of these areas, as the President remarked this morning, he's going to ensure that we continue to negotiate in both areas to provide the best deal for the American taxpayer. The President signed an executive order establishing a framework for expediting environmental reviews for high-priority infrastructure projects. Delays and other inefficiencies in the environmental review and permitting process are severely impeding critically important projects that will help us remodernize and rebuild our nation's infrastructure. This order will help put an end to the crippling delays caused by bureaucratic red tape. The President also signed a memorandum requiring the Commerce Secretary to submit a report recommending how best to streamline manufacturing permitting. The President has been hearing from manufacturers that excessive regulation are driving them out of the U.S. As part of his commitment to making America work again, the President has directed the Commerce Secretary to reach out to manufacturers and the public to identify regulations that are hurting them from moving forward. The President also signed a memorandum directing the Commerce Secretary to lead a study looking into building the Keystone and Dakota access pipelines, as well as any other future pipeline with U.S.-made steel and pipe and accessories. This is the first step in the President really delivering on his campaign promise to put American steel back at the backbone of the U.S. economy. The U.S. has lost nearly one-third of its manufacturing base since 1997. Even though the country's population has increased by 50 million people. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure, and we're going to do it with American workers and with American resources. As many of you recall, the Buy American theme was a major part of the President's inaugural address. This is clearly an immediate action and an extension of that promise that he made to the American people last Friday. We sorely need these infrastructure jobs. According to the National Association of Manufacturers, without improvements to our transportation systems, quote, the United States will lose more than 2.5 million jobs by 2025. Creating jobs and boosting wages is the President's top priority, and has been made very clear over the past 36 hours. This is an area where he's taking immediate action. At 1 o'clock, President was speaking with Indian Prime Minister Modi. We'll have a readout as soon as that's available. If we can get it to you during the briefing, we will. This afternoon, the President will hold a bipartisan meeting with key Senate leadership, including the Majority Leader, the Minority Leader, the Majority Whip, and the Minority Whip, to discuss his nomination for Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. As he noted earlier today, he intends to have a decision by the end of the week and an announcement early next week. The President has made it incredibly clear that he will appoint justices who protect our liberty and hold the highest regards for the Constitution. He continues to carefully consider potential future justices based on their commitment to upholding these principles. This meeting is an important opportunity for the President to consult with Senate leaders from both sides of the aisle on his potential choices for the bench. As you may have heard, Speaker Ryan extended an invitation to the President to address a joint session of Congress on February 28th. I'm pleased to inform you that the President has accepted that invitation, and he looks forward to sharing his plans for moving the country forward. I have a feeling by the time we get to February 28th, we will have a lot to talk about. It was great to see the nominations of Dr. Carson, Secretary Chow, Mr. Ross, and Governor Haley were advanced out of committee today. Just as a reminder, by the end of the first week of President Obama's first week in office, he had 12. So the Senate's got a little catching up to do, and I hope the Senate Democrats do their job and help us catch up to that number. One quick follow-up on our storm relief efforts that have plagued the Southeast. White House staff is in touch with officials in the states and will continue to provide assistance to the recovery. A FEMA team is on the ground in Atlanta, Georgia to support response and recovery activities. FEMA liaison officers have been deployed to emergency support centers in both Mississippi and Georgia for response activities. With that, I'd be glad to take a few questions. Sure. Jim Stinson, LifeSet.
Today, immigration enforcement organizations and activists expressed concern that they haven't seen immediate action on DACA and DAPA. I was just wondering, that was a key campaign pledge of President Trump on the campaign trail. When can people expect action on that? It wouldn't require. It would only require stopping. Renewing the applications wouldn't actually be retroactive against anyone. So what's the holdup?
Well, as I think I mentioned yesterday, I think when it comes to immigration and the promises that the President made during the campaign to both ensure that we build a wall and enforce our southern border, as well as reform our entire immigration system, his priority is first and foremost focused on people who pose a threat to people in our country, to criminals, frankly. And that's where he wants ICE to focus their efforts. With respect to DACA, I think he's considering to make sure that his cabinet-level team starts to organize and create a plan to move forward with respect to that issue, and that's where we are right now. David Jackson.
Sean, there are stories out there that the EPA officials have been gagged from talking to the press, talking to the media. Basically, it's the gag order. It's the same kind of thing we had from the Interior Department over the weekend. First of all, is that true? And secondly, why is that being done if it is?
I don't know. That story literally is breaking as we were entering the briefing room. We're looking into it. I don't think it's any surprise that when there's an administration turnover that we're going to review the policies. But with respect to the question you're asking, I don't have any information at this time. We asked the team to go look into it as we're entering the briefing room. And if I have an update while we're here, I'll be glad to get back to you.
The Interior Department, did they have the same kind of thing over the weekend? Supposedly they were banned from tweeting?
I read that. My understanding is that because they had inappropriately violated their own social media policies, there was guidance that was put out to the department to act in compliance with the rules that were set forth. Steve Holland.
Ron, in signing the orders on Keystone and Dakota Access this morning, he said he would like to renegotiate some of the terms. What exactly was he talking about there?
It's a great question, Steve. I think one of the things that the American people clearly know about Donald Trump is he's a successful businessman and a successful negotiator. And as he looks at these deals, what he's trying to ensure is that these projects that are great in the sense they're going to create jobs and help our economy, but in a lot of cases they're going to make these organizations a lot of money. And what he's ensuring is that the American taxpayer gets the best deal possible. So he's asking his team to review those deals and to make sure that if we're going to do all of these things to expedite these projects that go over or under a piece of U.S. soil, that the American taxpayer is considered in this process and that we get the best deal for our country, not just in terms of jobs and future economic growth and a little bit more energy security, but also in terms of making sure that the taxpayers writ large who own some of these lands or access to these lands and waters and rivers, in case of Dakota, or get the best deal possible. Charlie Sparing.
As you know, the March for Life is on Friday, and the President George W. Bush had a tradition of addressing the marchers through a phone call on the mall. Will the President be continuing that tradition on Friday?
I know Kellyanne is going to attend the event. I think we're still working through details, but we'll have further for you on the President's potential participation in that. I think it's no secret the President has campaigned as a pro-life president. It's something that is very important to him, as evidenced by the Mexico City policy reinstatement that he issued yesterday. Obviously, we're going to have heavy administration presence there. It's no secret that this administration and this president are going to do what they can to fight for life. With the exact participation level of the president, we'll find out whether it's a greeting of some sort or a call. I'll have a further update for you. Cecilia?
Does the president believe that millions voted illegally in this election, and what evidence do you have of widespread voter fraud in this election, if that's the case?
The president does believe that. He has stated that before. I think he stated his concerns of voter fraud and people voting illegally during the campaign. And he continues to maintain that belief based on studies and evidence that people have presented to him.
But exactly what evidence? Speaker Ryan today said there's no evidence. The National Association of Secretaries of State say that they don't agree with the president's assessment. What evidence do you have?
As I said, I think the president has believed that for a while based on studies and information he has. John Roberts.
In the waning hours of the Obama administration, they quietly transferred a lot of money out of the country, including $221 million to Palestinian Authority. Is the president okay with that transfer? And if he is not, will he seek to claw back some of that money?
Well, I think when it comes to how U.S. taxpayer money is spent in general, whether it's overseas or here at home, you've seen through the hiring freeze and other actions that he's going to take. You know, I just mentioned to Steve, I mean, he is very concerned about how taxpayer money is spent, whether it's sent overseas and what we get for it in terms of the relationship or our support for our democracy or aid to another country for their defenses. But he's going to be examining all aspects of the budget and how we look at all money, because I think that there is a newfound respect for how the American people's tax dollars are spent in this administration. And I think with his background as it is as a businessman and one who scrutinizes projects to bring them under budget on time, he's bringing that business acumen to the White House to the benefit of the American taxpayer.
Is he okay with that particular transfer?
I don't think I want to go any further to say that he is going to make sure that every deal, every dollar that is spent on behalf of by the government is done in a way that respects the American taxpayer.
Sean, when you were talking about that voter fraud, are you going to ask for an investigation? Is the White House going to formally ask for a probe into this alleged
No, I think he won very, very handily with 306 electoral votes, 33 states. He's very comfortable with his win, but I think...
to trouble him if he's bringing it up.
I think he was having a discussion with some folks and mentioned something in passing, which has been a long-standing belief that he's maintained. This isn't the first time that you've heard this concern of his. Trey?
It's not, but I think it's worth clarifying whether illegal ballots or illegal immigrants...
And I think there's been studies. There was one that came out of Pew in 2008 that showed 14% of people who have voted were non-citizens. There's other studies that have been presented to him. It's a belief he maintains. I mean,
just that they were counted improperly, as Dick Durbin says the president personally told him last night. It was that the people who voted...
I think I've asked and answered it. It's a belief that he's maintained for a while, a concern that he has about voter fraud, and that's based on information that's provided. Trey.
Thanks, Sean. Following President Trump's executive actions earlier today, is he concerned about large-scale protests surrounding the construction of the Dakota Access and Keystone XL pipelines like we saw at Standing Rock? And how will he address the concerns of those who oppose those plans?
I think he is going to make sure that he is looking or working with all parties involved, and that's part of to Steve's question. There's a way that you can continue to negotiate that, whether it's the Native Americans' concerns that they have on some of the lands in the Dakota pipeline. I mean, you're 93% there with Dakota, and I think that the president has shown through his business life that he knows how to negotiate a great deal where parties come out ahead, and he is willing to sit down with all of the individuals that are involved in the Dakota pipeline to make sure that it's a deal that benefits all of the parties of interest, or at least gets them something that we want. So that's part of it. Margaret.
Say Mara or Margaret? No, Margaret.
All right, one at a time. Okay, Margaret, then Mara. We'll stick with the M's for a while.
I'd like to ask you about Jim Comey, but I also very quickly wanted to follow up on Steve Holland's question about the pipelines and the renegotiation. The president, I think, sort of suggested that some of those renegotiations might already be happening, or that they would start happening. And I'm just wondering if you can clarify, like, are the mechanisms for that set? Have those discussions already begun?
Well, he just signed the executive order today, and part of it was that as he moves these things forward, he wants to make sure that he gets the best deal for the American taxpayer and works with the parties involved to ensure that people who might have concerns have an opportunity to come back to the table and see if there's a way to.
So the mechanisms are still being fleshed out, and the negotiations have not started again.
That's correct.
Jim Comey, what I wanted to ask was, could you make it official what has been reported by U.S. officials all day long, which is that the president has decided he wants Jim Comey to stay on, that Jim Comey has told him he will stay on. Did they discuss kind of the Russia investigations and the parameters?
Anything for that? I don't know what the status is. I'll have to follow up with the president. Mara.
Okay. Just a question about the hiring freeze yesterday. Yeah. It doesn't exempt the VA. And there are 41,500 unfilled medical jobs at the VA, which is really an extremely large number.
Right.
The VA was one of his top priorities, so he's
remember
now
it's a freeze, and part of it is to ensure it's hold on, but part of it is to get our VA secretary in there, and to figure out how we can best, because hiring people when you have a system that's not working, and then just going out and hiring additional people doesn't seem to be the most efficient way of solving the problem. What we need to do, whether it's the VA or any other agency, is make sure that we're hiring smartly and effectively and efficiently. And I think the VA in particular, if you look at the problems that have plagued people, hiring more people isn't the answer. It's hiring the right people, putting the procedures in place that ensure that our veterans, whether it's health care or mortgages or the other services that the VA provides to those who have served our nation, get the services that they've earned. And right now the system's broken. So the freeze is meant to pause, allow there to be an analysis of what can make this better. And it's not just the VA, although obviously that's high on the president's list. But it's making sure that all of the services of government are done in a way that, A, respects the taxpayer, but gives the American people the service or benefit that they truly deserve. So.
Just to follow up on Cecilia, if 3 to 5 million people voted illegally, that is a scandal of astronomical proportions. Doesn't he want to restore Americans' faith in their ballot system? Wouldn't he want an investigation of this?
Well, this is but Mara, as I've noted several times now, he's believed this for a long time, and I think he won fairly overwhelmingly. So he's not. And look, I'm
asking you, why not investigate something that is the biggest scandal in American electoral history? 3 to 5 million people voting illegally.
I think we'll see where we go from here, but right now the focus that the president has is on putting Americans back to work. It was a comment that he made on a long-standing belief in the back. Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Trump's campaign, he talked a lot about banning Muslims from coming into the country and extreme vetting in his process. When can we expect him to take action on this?
I think that's going to be one of the things that he looks at his Department of State when Rex Tillerson gets confirmed, and some of the other departments in Homeland Security, and trying to put together a place that enacts this extreme vetting. But I think the interesting thing about the question that you're asking is that we're sitting here today with two confirmed, or with three cabinet with Mike Pompeo last night. But we're sitting here asking where the president's agenda is moving forward at a time when Senate Democrats are holding up, a massive amount of this cabinet.
They're doing it purposefully?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it. When you look, let's walk back a second and remember that Chuck Schumer put out a statement saying that they had an issue with 8 or 9 of them. So that leaves about 12 of them, 13, that they didn't have a problem with. They were consensus candidates. And while I think every one of the people that the president has nominated to serve in his cabinet is unbelievably qualified, even the Democrats admitted that 12 to 13 of them were what they called consensus candidates and that they wouldn't oppose them. And yet here we are 2 days in. Hold on.
Do you have a message to those Democrats?
Let's get it done. I mean, our country's economy and safety is at stake. We have a continuity of government in place to ensure that we can continue to protect and preserve this country and move business forward. But the reason that you have a confirmed secretary or director or administrator is to make sure that you can enact the agenda that the president campaigned on. And I think that every minute that we stall is a moment that the Democrats should have to answer for. Yeah.
He's going on you.
Okay, I'm Anthony Harper, the Intermountain Christian Newspaper and the Christian Newspaper Association.
And Israel leaders in the Knesset, I'm aware of, are concerned about the misuse of U.S. tax dollars going to UN schools that are inciting kids to violence against the Jews. What do you think President Trump, how would he respond to these Israel leaders? They're MK leaders Sharon Haskell, Yehuda Glick, and Dr. Eliza Levy. I met recently, had interviews with them. Their concerns are very serious. So they would want to know what President Trump, or how he would respond to the misuse of these.
Well, I think I would go back to what I said to John a minute ago, which is that I think he has tremendous respect for how tax dollars are spent. But then I would mention again, I mean, we need a UN ambassador. We need a Secretary of State. There's a lot of these things that can start to happen under the direction of the new leadership that's being held up right now. Thank you. Tara.
Is the president open to the idea of choosing a mainstream candidate like some of the Democratic congressional leaders are urging him to do today?
For what?
For a Supreme Court nominee.
I think that defines. I think he's been very clear about his priorities. He's put out a list during the campaign of individuals that he would consider. But I mean, I think it's pretty mainstream to support the Constitution, pretty mainstream to respect, to follow the law, and not to create laws from the bench. That's what I think the majority of Americans would agree. And I think, when it comes to the candidates that he's put up for his cabinet, again, look at the quality and caliber of these individuals. That's what he's kind of continue to look for. People of high quality, of high caliber, that have gone, that fit the philosophy that he campaigned on. April.
Sean, I want to ask you a couple of questions. One, starting off with Sessions, this delay in a vote, primarily because of concerns about issues of civil rights with Sessions, as well as voting.
187. The previous question is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Madam Speaker?
Well, for what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts
I
seek
ask for a
recognition?
recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote's requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
And to vote now on the rule for debating a measure that would mean a permanent ban on federal funds allocated for abortion services, along with insurance coverage for abortions. The rule calls for an hour of general debate on the bill, and that is expected to follow this vote. We'll go back live now to today's White House briefing with spokesman Sean Spicer.
His record as an attorney, but as a United States Senator, he's been a very forceful advocate of the continuation of the Voting Rights Act. Yes, sir.
I'm asking a couple of questions.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay. So I know we're new to this together. So. All right. So on the issue of race, going back, because you talked for a long time yesterday on the issue of race, and I wanted to ask you a couple of things, and I talked to the current head of the NAACP, who is accusing this administration of something called stereotyping by omission, saying that the president has met with athletes and entertainers, but yet has not met with civil rights leaders. And during his inauguration speech, he talked about inner cities, urban areas being riddled with gangs, violence, and drugs. What is the agenda? What are you planning when it comes to?
Well, April, just the other day he sat down with Martin Luther King Jr. I would call him a civil rights leader.
His dad was the civil rights leader.
Well, I think that he has done. I think he has done a lot for that. There's a lot of the pastors that he's met with. He has met with a lot of individuals on that issue throughout the campaign. They've come up and down the tower. He's brought them in and out of the during the campaign and during the transition. He's with Aveda King the other day during the prayer service. There's a ton of individuals that he's met with to talk about this issue, and I don't think it's something that he takes lightly. He's talked about it tremendously because it's important to him, both in terms of where this country moves forward and some of the issues that face some of the minority communities in terms of not just education but jobs and hiring and health care and access to small business lending. Those are all areas that he's been very concerned with and that he's talked about the need to address.
Rollout of a plan.
We're on day 2. I know you're all anxious. I appreciate it.
He made this statement during the inauguration.
I understand it, and we're on day 2, and look what he's doing. But I think that when you look at the jobs programs, the Dakota Pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, the things that are going to bring jobs back and good-paying jobs with benefits, those benefit every American, regardless of the color of your skin. And I think that, he talked to the labor leaders today about apprenticeships and how we can grow the economy, bring back training centers. Those benefit every American. And I think that those are the kind of things that he's committed to, is figuring out how do we look at the educational piece to ensure that as people transfer out of one job to another, as technology evolves, that we prepare people who might have had a blue-collar job to transfer into a technology-based job. But there's a lot of things that we can do in terms of training and retraining, VOTEC, and other areas of our society that help people advance, whether their background or not. And that's the kind of stuff that I think will help move them up. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Sean. The CBO came out with a report this morning that said if the current spending levels stay as they are, the government's going to spend about put the country in another $10 trillion of debt over the next 10 years. Does that reinforce for the president the need to cut spending? And if
Absolutely.
so, I mean, where in the government can he cut spending enough to make a dent on that?
Well, look, I think this is the American people elected the right guy at the right time. This is somebody who understands how to cut a good deal, how to negotiate a good deal, and how to manage a budget. You look at how he's managed himself and his projects under budget and either on time or ahead of time. That's the kind of philosophy that he's bringing into to this government and to this White House, is making sure that not only do we respect taxpayers and figure out whether or not we're talking about the hiring freeze or how we do business or how much money we send in aid, that we make sure that the money that we send is being used well, the programs that we're implementing are done in a way that are done in the most efficiently and effective ways. But it's a whole of government process. It's trying to make sure that, look at what he did with Boeing and Lockheed on the planes. It's going in and saying we can lower that price more, we can negotiate further. It's why when Steve asked about the two pipelines, that he wanted to make sure that he inserted pieces to say we can negotiate further. If we can get a better deal out of the American taxpayer, if someone's getting use of our lands or our waterways to build something that they're going to profit for it, can we find a way to ensure that the American taxpayer receives a benefit? That would go to the U.S. Treasury. And there's a lot of ways that he's going to continue to look at this, whether it's the money coming in or the money going out. How do we get a handle on this? But I think that we have the right guy at the helm of the country right now when it comes to ensuring that our tax dollars are spent well and our deficits addressed. One last piece, when it comes to energy exploration, it's not just about energy. It's not just about finding new ways to bring in energy to this country. It's about new ways of creating economic growth, looking at ways that our natural resources can not just benefit us to become more energy independent, but can to bring money into the Treasury to either reduce the deficit, create jobs, or whatever. But there's a lot of ways and a lot of new thinking that's going on that he's empowered his team and his cabinet to look at to create jobs, to grow the economy, and to bring the deficit down. Yes, sir.
Two questions, and both, I know you love us, but if there are protests again, if this pipeline goes through, last time during the protests, there were independent journalists that were arrested and detained. Same question I asked the Obama administration.
36, the nays are 183. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, Sir. This letter is to inform you that effective today I am resigning as the ranking member of the Committee on Ethics, as I have reached the applicable term limit under rules of the Democratic Caucus. It has been a privilege and a high honor to serve on the committee, which serves an essential function for the House and the public. Signed sincerely, Linda T. Sanchez.
Without objection, the resignation is accepted. The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration by the Chamber.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 56, resolved that the following named members be and are hereby elected to the following standing committee of the House of Representatives. 1. Committee on Ethics, Mr. Deutsch, Ms. Clark of New York, Mr. Polis, and Mr. Brown of Maryland.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to, and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
I thank the gentlelady.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 55, I call up the bill H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion and Abortion Industry Full Disclosure Act, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor of the House. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 7, a bill to prohibit taxpayer-funded abortions.
Pursuant to House Resolution 55, the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Mrs. Black, and the gentlewoman from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Tennessee.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on H.R. 7 currently under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The chair asks the members to take their conversations off the floor. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, and I thank the gentleman from New Jersey, my dear friend, Mr. Chris Smith, for his unflinching leadership on this issue. You know, it was just a week ago that the groups of women marched in the streets of D.C. and other cities across the country, apparently ready to write off this presidency as it just began. But there were millions of pro-life women who were explicitly told that they were unwelcome at this event. So today, the People's House is giving them and the more than 60% of Americans from all political persuasions who oppose taxpayer funding of abortion a voice. That legislation before us will protect Americans' conscience rights by ensuring that their hard-earned tax dollars are not used to fund the destruction of innocent life. That is the principle that members of both parties have supported in this chamber before. Every year, Democrats and Republicans alike have come together to support the funding bills that maintain a law called the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits the direct federal funding of abortion with limited exceptions. This 40-year-old law has saved an estimated 2 million lives, but it is not permanent, meaning that this time-honored protection could be taken away on a whim. What's more, the law, in its current form, has clear loopholes. A 2014 GAO study found that taxpayer-funded insurance subsidies could be used to pay for abortions on over 1,000 Obamacare plans nationwide.
That is why, today, we have the opportunity to make this life-affirming law permanent and government-wide. As a mother and a grandmother and a nurse for more than 40 years, this measure is especially meaningful to me. During my years in healthcare industry, I saw the joy in young parents' eyes when they met their newborn for the very first time. I held the hands of grieving spouses and children as they said goodbye to their loved ones. And sadly, I witnessed a young woman lose her life due to the effects of a botched abortion. These experiences informed my view that all life is a precious gift from God. I pray that in time this truth will be reflected in our nation's laws. But until then, can't we at least do this much? I urge a yes vote on the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself 2 minutes.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, our constituents are looking to this Congress to address the economy, jobs, our crumbling infrastructure, and so many other issues. But despite these pressing needs, the only substantive bill this House is considering this week is a bill restricting a woman's ability to get a full range of health care services, and a bill we've passed before in this House and that we know is going nowhere in the other body. Its title alone must be part of the majority's new plan to redefine facts. As we heard the other day, we now apparently have in our discourse alternative facts. This bill takes that to a whole new level. And let me tell you why. The bill is called the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. But under current law, under the Hyde Amendment, which I hate, which I will do everything to repeal, but under the current law, we have no taxpayer funding for abortion. Taxpayer funds are currently prohibited from use for abortions. Instead, what this bill does is it takes that concept and it uses it to far expand a restriction on a woman's ability to get the full health care that she needs. Let me talk about what this bill does exactly. First of all, it codifies the Hyde Amendment into statute, which has never been done in this nation's history. Secondly, it codifies a ban on abortions in D.C., even when they are done with D.C.'s taxpayer money and not with federal money. Number three, it codifies the Helms Amendment, which denies women abroad access to safe abortion care by severely restricting the use of U.S. funds to pay for health care services in developing countries. I yield myself another minute.
The gentlewoman's recognized.
It severely restricts abortion coverage in the ACA's exchanges by forbidding people who have plans where they get subsidies from paying for plans with their own money. This is a far expansion of a restriction on a woman's right to get her own health insurance with her own money. It denies insurance-related tax credits to small business that choose plans that offer abortion services. It permanently bans abortion services for federal employees, and it codifies a ban on abortion coverage for women in military services overseas. The fact that we're debating this today, just one day after President Trump issued an executive order reinstating the global gag rule, is a slap in the face to the over 3 million women who marched last weekend. Let's vote no on this bill, and let's go to the business that the American public really cares about. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman for Virginia, who is the chair of the Judiciary Committee and a longstanding supporter of pro-life, Mr. Goodlatte.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlewoman, and I thank her for her ardent work on this important cause. However stark Americans' differences of opinion can be on the matter of abortion generally, there has been long bipartisan agreement that federal taxpayer funds should not be used to destroy innocent life. The Hyde Amendment named for its chief sponsor, former House Judiciary Committee Chairman Henry Hyde, has prohibited the federal funding of abortion since 1976, when it passed a House and Senate that was composed overwhelmingly of Democratic members. It has been renewed each appropriation cycle with few changes for over 40 years, supported by Congresses controlled by both parties and presidents from both parties. It is probably the most bipartisan pro-life proposal sustained over a longer period of time than any other. It's time the Hyde Amendment was codified in the U.S. Code. H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act, sponsored by Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey, would do just that. It would codify the two core principles of the Hyde Amendment throughout the operations of the federal government, namely a ban on federal funding for abortions and a ban on the use of federal funds for health benefits coverage that includes coverage of abortion. As hundreds of thousands of people from across the country come to Washington to express their love of unborn children at the annual March for Life, and as we now have a president who supports this legislation, let's reflect on what could be accomplished if the bill we consider today were signed into law. During the time the Hyde Amendment has been in place, the most reliable estimates, and those of the Congressional Budget Office, are that millions of innocent children and their mothers have been spared the horrors of abortion. Millions of lives have been saved, and of those millions of lives saved, many more have grown up to bear their own children and to raise them in happy, loving families. This bill is more than a proposed law. It is a celebration of the lives of those millions of Americans, boys and girls, men and women of all races, who give joy and feel love and create and contribute, all because of the policies this bill contains. And even more than that, this bill is a welcome sign for millions and millions more Americans to come. I congratulate the President for already reinstating the Mexico City policy, which prohibits the federal funding of abortions overseas. And I look forward to his signing this bill into law to codify the same policy here in America. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. Gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
I'm pleased to now yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
The gentlewoman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 7. We are only 10 days into this 115th Congress, and already Republicans are bringing legislation to the floor to harm women's health. It's clear that House Republicans do not respect women and our ability to make our own decisions. Millions of women peacefully marched in cities around the country and around the world, and yet here we are once again voting legislation to give politicians more control over women's bodies than they have of their own. Let's be clear, the ultimate goal of this bill is to effectively eliminate access to abortions, even when women pay for it themselves. 7 in 10 Americans believe that abortion should be safe and legal. And just as we've seen in Texas, when women lose access to abortion, they will take drastic action to seek back-alley abortions or to self-abort. Let's remember that Roe v. Wade was not the beginning of women having abortions. It was the end of women dying from abortions. And I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from South Dakota, Ms. Noem, member of Ways and Means, my colleague.
Gentlewoman from South Dakota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, and I rise today in support of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Specifically, this bill says directly that federal dollars, taxpayer dollars, could not be used to provide abortions. It does not do more than that. What it does is it puts into statute a permanency to legislation that has annually been renewed. You know, becoming a parent was something that my husband and I always dreamed about. And when we did realize that we were having our first child, we prayed for her. And we prayed for our future children, recognizing that they were a gift from God and that life was to be protected, even from the moment of conception. That's the belief that I have, but that's my hope and my dream for everyone here in America, that we would recognize that those children are a gift from God to us to protect, to keep, and to make sure that they're brought into this world safely and helped from there on. My perspective and my profound commitment to protecting unborn children is why I'm standing here today. Time and again, Congress has risen with bipartisan support to oppose taxpayer-funded abortions. Annual provisions, including the Hyde Amendment, have been passed repeatedly, and they've been estimated to save over 2 million innocent lives. Our goal here is to save even more. We need to make these provisions permanent. Obamacare has allowed the tax dollars of hardworking Americans to flow to over 1,000 abortion-covering health plans. This has made today's bipartisan legislation more important than ever. H.R. 7 would create a permanent government-wide prohibition against federal dollars to fund abortive procedures. It would also ensure the Affordable Care Act complies with the Hyde Amendment until it is repealed and replaced. That is the right thing to do. Today, we stand to make sure that every single life is valued, not just the ones that we pick and choose for political reasons, that every single one that God has created has an opportunity to live out its dreams here in the United States of America. And thank you. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to put Mr. Conyers' floor statement into the record. And I now recognize the Congresswoman from Florida, Ms. Castor, for 1 minute. She's not here. Susan Davis here. I now recognize the woman from California, Barbara Leaf, for 1 minute.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding for your tireless work and leadership on behalf of women's health. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 7. This discriminatory bill would undermine a woman's access to abortion care, which is a constitutional right as affirmed by Roe v. Wade 44 years ago. By making the Hyde Amendment permanent, this bill would restrict access to reproductive health care for millions of women and disproportionately harm low-income women and women of color. As if this isn't enough, H.R. 7 comes on the heels of a dramatic expansion of the global gag rule, which denies life-saving health care to women around the world. Not to mention continuous Republican attacks on contraceptive access, comprehensive sex education, and Planned Parenthood. Madam Speaker, now I was a staffer on Capitol Hill when the Hyde Amendment was first passed, and I remember the days very clearly of back alley abortions. Clearly, Republicans are trying to take us back to the days when women died from unsafe abortions in this country. That's why I offered an amendment that would have recognized that women, not employers or politicians, have the right to make their own reproductive health choices. Shamefully, the Rules Committee refused to make it in order and allow for a debate. Madam Speaker, women should be able to make their own decisions about reproductive health care, including abortions, without members of Congress or employers interfering.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I have referenced in my opening remarks that this has been a bipartisan support for this measure on the Hyde Amendment on a yearly basis. And I just want to make mention that the former gentlelady from California that just spoke did vote for this measure in the FY16 Omni bill. It is my honor now to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, who is the sponsor of the bill, is a champion for the unborn, and it is really an honor for me to have served with him on this particular issue. I yield him 3 minutes.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
I want to first thank the distinguished gentlelady, my good friend Diane Black, for her extraordinary leadership. I also want to say to my colleagues that, and I hope this really is accepted for the profound change that it underscores, the Hyde Amendment has saved 2 million lives. 2 million survivors who would have died had Medicaid funding for abortion not been available. This is over the course of 40 years, but 2 million lives, some of whom are 39, 38, it's about 60,000 children every year. And you know, if you look at where this comes from, much of the mega-analysis has come from a peer review done by the Guttmacher Institute in 2009. And they have found that there's a 25% reductions in Medicaid abortions when Medicaid money is not available to effectuate the dismemberment and the chemical poisoning of an unborn child. Defense of the unborn child is the human rights issue of our time, Madam Speaker. You know, we talk about the unborn child, we degrade them, we treat them as if they're tumors, warts, to be excised, rather than children growing, developing, and maturing. Ultrasound imaging, as we all know, has shattered the myth that somehow an unborn child is anything but human and alive. And I hope that the science, which is very readily available, catches up with the policy. This makes Hyde and all the other amendments permanent. We know that every year we have an annual battle over several of those amendments. It also, finally, Title II, takes out of Obamacare the facilitation and the funding of abortion. When President Obama did his executive order in December in 2010, he said that the Hyde Amendment would be applied to the Obamacare exchanges. For months and years after that, in House debate, people have said that has happened. It did not. We know beyond any reasonable doubt, and we enlisted GAO to look at that, well over 1,000 plans pay for abortion on demand in the Obamacare exchanges. So that got the votes of the pro-life Democrats needed to effectuate the passage of the Affordable Care Act, but frankly, it hasn't happened. Title II of this bill says the Hyde Amendment will be applied to the Obamacare exchanges. Had that been done faithfully by the President, there would be no need for Title II of this bill. I remember when the President stood right there in September of 2009 and said, under our plan, no taxpayer funding will be used to pay for abortion. Absolutely untrue. This language, H.R. 7, makes that true. We don't want to be complicit in the killing and the maiming of unborn children. And as we know now, beyond any reasonable doubt, post-abortive women increasingly are coming forward and speaking out, those especially who have found peace and reconciliation, to say abortion also hurts women. There are 2 victims in every abortion, mother and baby. 2 million lives saved. That's what we should be all about, life affirming and the saving of human life.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield to one of our new members from Washington State, Congresswoman Jayapal, 1 minute.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise in strong opposition to this bill. This weekend, millions of women made it clear that they demand respect. Instead, for their efforts, they have received a trip to 1984, where once again a paternalistic White House signed executive orders infringing on a woman's right to choose. H.R. 7, the bill we are considering here today, is the next notch in the Republican belt that will take away our control over our own bodies. I have years of experience working in family planning, and I can tell you that this bill takes away our ability to plan our families properly and to make decisions about our own bodies, a decision that should be left to a woman and her physician. Make no mistake, this isn't a health care issue. It is part of an extreme right-wing political agenda that puts women's rights on the chopping block. H.R. 7 tells millions of women that their voices don't matter and their rights don't count. Passing this bill will create even more barriers for women, including women of color trying to access quality health care. I urge my colleagues to oppose this misguided and heavy-handed bill. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it is my honor to yield 1 minute to one of my Ways and Means colleagues and a longtime supporter of pro-life, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscom.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Black. Madam Speaker, I've got a prediction to make, and here's my prediction.
In the course of this debate, the opponents of H.R. 7 will not acknowledge nor give voice to Congressman Smith's claim of saving 2 million lives. Why? Because to acknowledge 2 million lives that are saved is to acknowledge the weakness of an argument. That is, those people are to be dismissed. And how do you dismiss 2 million people, Madam Speaker? How do you dismiss 2 million people? Over 60,000 people every year. If you can imagine what it would be like if someone came in here and with certainty, absolute confidence, said unambiguously, if you pass this law, you're going to save 60 million lives, we would line up. We would be voting on that over and over and over again. And yet my prediction is, during the remainder of this debate, because we've not heard a word about it so far, during the remainder of the debate, the opponents will be silent about those 2 million lives. We need to vote for this and save lives in the future. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I want to answer his question with a question. Do you care about the 4 million children today that live off of less than $2 a day and live in extreme poverty, and they're alive? No, you don't. Let me quote our founding father, Samuel Adams. Freedom of thought and the rights of private judgment in matters of conscience direct their happy course to this happy country. The First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, all sort of convene to this notion of rights of privacy in this country, except when it comes to women and their bodies. Republicans continue to wreak havoc for women's health, operating as if they have some sort of moral imperative to tell us, get your laws off our bodies. And I yield back.
Members are reminded to please address their remarks to the chair. Gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And it is my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Franks, who has been a long-standing supporter of life.
Gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, I want to thank Congresswoman Black for this bill. You know, it seems like whenever we talk about this issue, we always talk past each other. But the real question before us is, does abortion kill a little baby? If it doesn't, I'm ready to quit talking about it, ladies and gentlemen. But if it does, then those of us sitting in the seat of freedom are also standing in the midst of the greatest human genocide in the history of humanity. And although we may not agree on all the vicissitudes of abortion, one thing is certain. Someday, we as a society will look back and we will recognize the humanity of these little children of God and the inhumanity of what was being done to them. And we will regret these days. Until then, at least can't we get together and say that we shouldn't force taxpayers to pay for the killing of innocent little human beings. I pray that we can open our eyes to that truth. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Chu.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
On Saturday, millions of people took a stand against the assault on women's rights. Today, I stand with them once again to say we have had enough. Only 2 days after these historic marches, Republicans in Congress have introduced H.R. 7 to silence women by limiting their constitutional right to make personal choices about their reproductive health without undue government interference. H.R. 7 is a woman's health catastrophe. Not only would it codify the discriminatory Hyde Amendment, it would penalize employers who offer health care plans with comprehensive coverage and prevent the 80% of ACA enrollees who receive subsidies from purchasing plans that cover abortion services. In effect, it makes abortion an option only for the wealthy. The law of the land does not say that only some women have the right to choose. It says that all women have the right to choose. I urge my colleagues to oppose this reckless legislation.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I want to once again mention that this has been a long-standing bipartisan support for the support of the Hyde Amendment. As a matter of fact, the gentlelady from California that just spoke voted for this on 3 different occasions, most recently in the MACRA that was passed in 2015, the Omni, which was passed in December of 2015, and also in December of 2016 in the FY17 CR. It is now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Alabama, a member of the Probst Committee and a strong supporter of pro-life.
The gentlelady from Alabama is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I thank my colleague from Tennessee, the gentlelady from Tennessee, for yielding me this time. Opponents of this bill are suggesting that we are against women's health care. What we are vehemently opposed to is the killing of innocent lives, innocent babies. So let's call abortion abortion and be reminded that the one voice, Madam Chairman, not heard today is that of the baby. So it is my privilege, alongside my colleagues, to speak on behalf of those who are not here today to speak for themselves. No taxpayer dollars should ever go to fund abortions. This is a common sense truth that even the most ardent pro-abortion activists have a hard time arguing. I am unapologetically pro-life, and it is no secret that I believe in stronger protections for unborn children under the law. But I also believe that we must assign greater respect for life within our society. That is why it is so important for Congress to make a statement once and for all that there is no place in the federal budget for abortion funding. As an appropriator, I can tell you that the Hyde Amendment has been indispensable to stopping funding for abortion throughout our government health care agencies. Now it is time to apply the same longstanding provision across the entire federal government. Madam Chairman, for my pro-life colleagues and I, fighting on behalf of the unborn has been an uphill battle these last several years. The abortion industry's fierce allies in the Senate and the Obama administration have made sure that many worthy pro-life measures were defeated. However, with a unified Republican government, our hope is that our prospects have changed for the better. On just the second day of his presidency, President Trump issued an executive order blocking federal funding for international groups to provide or promote abortions. For the pro-life community, this long overdue action was a welcome sign that the Trump administration will be a powerful ally in the fight for life. May I have 30 more seconds?
Still 30 more seconds.
Thank you. There are many policy improvements to pursue: reasonable limits on abortions after 5 months of pregnancy, stopping the shell game of Title X funding at Planned Parenthood, improving access to adoption age services, and more. But a great place to start is passing H.R. 7. It is our enduring responsibility to defend the unborn, and it is imperative we get this right. Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee reserves. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Madam Speaker, the gentlelady from Tennessee has attempted to imply that several of our speakers today support the Hyde Amendment because they voted for very large omnibus spending bills that included the Hyde Amendment. I'd like to be really clear that none of the speakers on this side today do support the Hyde Amendment. And in fact, in the last Congress, we had a bill, the Each Woman Act, sponsored by a number of us with 129 co-sponsors, which would repeal the Hyde Amendment. But sometimes people vote for large pieces of legislation because they do things like keep our government open, build highways and roads. But we will do everything in our power to repeal this poorly thought and regressive amendment, and we will do everything we can to defeat this bill today. I'm now very pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady and for her leadership. President Trump once said his favorite book is the Bible. I think he's writing a new book for the Bible called The Apocalypse of Women. It's a reverse Genesis. In the beginning, he divided the country in half with right-wing dog whistles in his inaugural address. On the second day, he ignored millions of people who marched across America and the world. On the third day, he pondered changes to NAFTA and which women's rights to trade away. On the fourth day, he reinstated and expanded the global gag rule, risking women's lives worldwide. Today, he and his House mouthpieces are blocking access to domestic reproductive health coverage, trumpeting alternative facts about legal abortions that have been somehow prevented, some 2 million of them. We'll prove it. I shudder to think what will happen tomorrow, and I doubt on the seventh day it will be devoted to rest. We must fight this madness and oppose H.R. 7. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
I yield 15 seconds to Mr. Smith.
I thank my friend for yielding. My distinguished colleague said prove it about the 2 million. Well, there is a very extensive study done by Michael New, but the literature, the review of literature done in June of 2009 by the Guttmacher Institute found, and I quote, approximately 1/4 of women who would have had Medicaid-funded abortions instead gave birth when this funding was unavailable. Back.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Yes, I yield 3 minutes to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady.
Gentleman from Texas recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in strong support of H.R. 7. No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. This bill is pro-life, it's pro-family, and it's pro-taxpayer. And I want to thank Representatives Chris Smith and Diane Black for their unwavering leadership in bringing this bill forward. Among other important actions, what I'm excited about is this bill finally makes the Hyde Amendment permanent. This important and long-standing policy prohibits taxpayer dollars from being used to fund abortions through federal programs. And for many years, it was the policy of America that whether you were pro-choice or, as I am, strongly pro-life, that your taxpayer dollars would not be used for the controversial act of abortion. Taking this action now is especially important given that under the Affordable Care Act, taxpayer-funded health insurance subsidies have been funneled toward health plans that do cover abortion services. The bill before us today will ensure that taxpayer dollars aren't used in any form to cover elective abortions. This policy will be permanent and it will apply government-wide, including in the Affordable Care Act. Right now, House Republicans are working to repeal this failed law and put in place the 21st century health care system Americans deserve. By passing this bill, we can also take immediate action to protect life and taxpayer dollars from the law's harmful impacts. For me, this is a family issue. My wife and I are proud parents of 2 adoptive children. We have a family only because 2 women in 2 very difficult situations chose life. It is important that our government and the laws that represent us encourage those choices and encourage and protect innocent lives. This bill today takes such an important step forward. I want to thank again Congressman Smith and Representative Diane Black for your leadership, and I urge all my colleagues to join me in supporting this passage. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Frankel.
The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank you. I thank the gentlelady from Colorado. Madam Speaker, for women to thrive in the economic and social opportunities of our nation, we must have the ability to control our own reproductive lives with full access to real health care choices. Republican, unrelenting efforts to force unwanted pregnancies and eradicate affordable, safe abortion will not save lives. Repealing the Affordable Care Act, defunding Planned Parenthood, and now driving insurance coverage for abortion into extinction will return women to the days of coat hanger medicine. Allowing women to be killed and maimed in back alleys is not pro-life. It will not make America great again. Women of America are on the march, and Madam Speaker, we will not retreat. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, I want to talk about the long-standing bipartisan support for the Hyde Amendment. The gentlelady from Florida has supported this measure in the Omni Bill and also the CR of 2017. It is now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Wagner, who is a member of the Financial Services Committee, but she and her family have been fighting for pro-life issues for many, many, many years. I yield to Ms. Wagner.
The gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend and colleague, the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Diane Black, for her wonderful leadership on this issue, along with Congressman Smith also for his wonderful leadership. Madam Speaker, I rise today to express my support for the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. The Hyde Amendment has received bipartisan support for 40 years because it is a testimony to the freedom of conscience for all Americans and the dignity of the unborn. I am heartbroken that opposition to the amendment has become a political gimmick. All human beings, the born, the unborn, the young, the old, the sick, the healthy, are entitled to a government that promotes their dignity, their conscience, and their gift of life. This bill spells out Congress's commitment to all people, including children across our nation, that the profits of big abortion should not be pilfered off the hard work of the American citizen. No tax dollars should be spent on the destruction of human life. In passing this bill and making the Hyde language permanent, we affirm that protecting children and mothers is our most precious duty as members of Congress. I urge my colleagues to vote for life. And I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Castor.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank Congresswoman DeGette for yielding the time, and I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 7 and urge the Republican-led Congress to hear the voices of the millions that marched on Saturday who proclaimed that women's rights must be respected, including a woman's right to choose her own health care. I was part of that march with many of my neighbors from Florida to send a message to this Congress that our rights, our constitutional rights, must be preserved. Americans have a right to privacy, as we're reminded on this anniversary week of Roe versus Wade, but this Republican bill tramples on that right to privacy. Women and their families and their doctors have the right to make their personal health care decisions, not the mostly male politicians in Washington. And it's especially appalling that the Republicans have targeted female veterans and those that serve in the military for a reduction in care. So I urge a no vote on this unconstitutional bill and encourage Americans to continue to lift their voices.
The gentlewoman from Colorado reserves. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And once again, I want to say that this has been a long-standing bipartisan support for the Hyde Amendment, and the gentlelady from Florida supported this measure back in 2015 on the H.R. 2 macro bill and the 2015 Omni Bill, H.R. 2029. It is now my honor to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Utah, Ms. Love.
The gentlelady from Utah is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let's talk about what this is really about. This is about the loss of human lives. Each child potentially brings with them unique gifts and talents that can be used for the betterment of our society. An unborn child may be the doctor that cures cancer or Alzheimer's, may be the astronaut that lands us on Mars, or the future leader that solves the problems of today. The list of our children's potential is infinite in value. Any time a child's life is lost, there's something more that is lost. It's a loss for us. it's a loss for our society, and it's a loss for our nation. If you want to invest in our future, in the words of Henry Hyde, we cannot, in logic or conscience, help fund the execution of these innocent, defenseless human lives. A strong majority of Americans and bipartisan majority in Congress opposes taxpayer-funded abortions. Because of this, there exists currently over 40 years of laws that prevent this practice. These laws have been deemed constitutional by the United States Supreme Court. So this is not about women's health. I want you to know very clearly that I support women's health. I support a healthy, organic, open healthcare system that gives women more care than they currently receive today. What this bill does is it codifies something that we already have. It ends the patchwork and establishes permanent protections for our children and the future of our society. And I want you to know, Madam Speaker, that when I stand up and I meet with my Maker, I want you to know that I am not going to be ashamed. I'm going to know that I stood up for the lives of these innocent children. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of our future, in favor of our unborn potential, and in favor of H.R. 7. I yield back.
And yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Foster.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Ms. DeGant, for yielding me this time. This weekend, we saw millions of Americans march in cities and towns across the country and around the world, far more than attended the inauguration the day before. I joined the march in Chicago, where one of the most visible concerns was women's reproductive freedom. And today, House Republicans, roughly 90% of them white males, responded by showing the women of America exactly how little they respect those rights. Madam Speaker, a party that lost the popular vote by almost 3 million votes does not have a mandate to deny women the right to make their own health care decisions. Perhaps I should remind my Republican colleagues that unless you are their doctor, they don't need your opinion. Women in the federal workforce, low-income women, women in the military, women employed by small businesses are all perfectly capable of having a conversation with their doctor about their health. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on the bill and no to disrespecting the women of America. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And now it's my honor to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Yoho.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Life begins at conception. I believe it is our responsibility to protect the millions of unborn children whose voices go unheard. As a Christian and a father of 3, I believe the lives of all children, including the unborn, are just as important as yours or mine. That is why I stand here today in support of H.R. 7. This bill safeguards the lives of unborn children who are robbed of their opportunity to experience the marvels of life. H.R. 7 closes the loopholes that have permitted the subsidization of the abortions by taxpayers who are morally opposed to the practice. Additionally, this bill also requires insurance providers who receive federal subsidies through participation in the healthcare exchanges to report to the consumers whether or not they will be subject to a surcharge that covers abortion services at the time of purchase. It boggles the mind that our federal government had the arrogance to skirt long-standing laws in order to trick the American taxpayers into unknowingly contribute to abortions in the first place. This bill has passed the House numerous times. The merits of this bill are clear, and I urge my colleagues to support swift passage of H.R. 7, and I yield back and thank Chairman Black.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from New York, Ms. Velasquez.
The gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the gentlelady for yielding. Madam Speaker, on Saturday, millions of Americans around the nation spoke with a collective voice, opposing President Trump's plans to trample women's rights. Yet, here we are, the first week of the new administration, voting on a bill to scale back women's health benefits. Let's be clear, this bill is not about preventing federal funds from going to abortions. Sadly, current law already prevents that. In reality, this bill will affect millions of women who purchase coverage with their own money. It will make it nearly impossible for insurance providers to offer plans fully covering women's reproductive health, and it will harm low-income women who need access to an abortion, turning back the clock on women's reproductive rights. It is day 5 of the Trump presidency, and women are already being attacked at every corner. But I promise my colleagues this: the American people are watching. They will remember this vote. Vote no on this bill.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to remind everyone of the longstanding bipartisan support for the Hyde Amendment, and the gentlelady from New York voted for this measure in the Omni Bill H.R. 2029 in 2015, and then on the macro bill also in 2015.
Would the gentlelady yield?
It is my honor now to yield 1 minute to Mr. Russell, who is from Oklahoma.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The carving up and commercial sale of dismembered unborn children ranks as one of the most horrific and barbaric acts in American and human history. As an adoptive father, I speak today on behalf of the 55 million Americans that have had their lives brutally ended with the scalpel, the suction hose, and the callousness of the murderous culture that allows it to perpetuate. These Americans had a right to choose life that they did not want to lose. We have the ability to restore to future Americans that choice. Until that day, no American should be forced to end the life of an innocent human being with their tax dollars. We can carve up a child and call it a choice. We can destroy human life and call it health care. We can make the killing of children legal and pretend it is beneficial. We can cover acts of barbarity with the veneer of civility, but we cannot escape our accountability before the Creator of life. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, you know, the gentlelady from Tennessee keeps saying over and over that different people voted for H.R. 2029, and therefore they must be for the Hyde Amendment. I'd like to point out that she herself voted against H.R. 2029. I guess maybe that means she's against the Hyde Amendment since she voted against that bill. The point I'm making is all of us oppose the Hyde Amendment. We're all co-sponsoring the Each Woman Act. Simply because you vote for or against a large omnibus bill does not mean you're necessarily in favor of or against the Hyde Amendment. I would now like to recognize for 1 minute the distinguished gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, and thank you to the gentlelady for yielding to me. H.R. 7 will make permanent the harmful and discriminatory Hyde Amendment, penalizing small businesses who want to provide comprehensive health coverage to their employees, and once again trampling on the District of Columbia by prohibiting the district from spending its own local funds for abortion coverage. Yet again, the GOP has put our bodies and the choices we should get to make about them in the middle of a political firestorm. And with every exhaustingly repetitive argument about when, how, and where a woman should be able to make those decisions, our country suffers. If my Republican colleagues are so concerned about the life of a child, why isn't their priority to put forth a plan for public education? Why haven't we seen a comprehensive plan to continue the job growth that President Barack Obama started? Their motives are transparent, and I refuse to let this White House or any elected officials play politics with women's bodies. And as we continue down this dangerous road, today, tomorrow, and every day thereafter will be a day of resistance. That being said, I urge my colleagues to oppose.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
I would like to now yield 1 minute to one of our newest members, Mr. Mitchell from Michigan.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank the gentlewoman from Tennessee. Madam Speaker,
I rise in support of the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act and Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act, which I proudly co-sponsored. 4 years ago, my wife and I adopted a young child from an orphanage. People say it changed his life. It changed ours. This year, the theme of March for Our Life is the power of one, meaning that every single person can change the course of history if given the chance to live. Every year, 1 million unborn babies are stripped of the right to life, which our Declaration of Independence calls unalienable. Moreover, those opposed to abortion have been forced to violate their consciences through taxpayer-funded abortions. This legislation reinforces a culture of life by making current prohibitions against taxpayer-funded abortions permanent. Madam Speaker, I stand in the spirit of the power of one to give the voice to the voiceless, the rights back to the unborn, and urge passage of this legislation. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized.
Speaker, may I inquire as to the time remaining on each side?
The gentlewoman from Colorado has 14.5 minutes. The gentlewoman from Tennessee has 3.5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
With H.R. 7, House Republicans are again targeting American women's health care. The bill limits financial assistance in order to restrict women's choices in the health insurance marketplace, forcing women and their families to select only certain plans. The goal is to restrict the ability of a woman to make her own choices. This bill comes up one day after President Trump reinstituted the Mexico rule. It prohibits U.S. foreign assistance to any organization which uses not those funds, but those from any other source for any activity related to abortion services. When I was assistant administrator for AID in the late 70s, I led the highly organized effort that established a strict process for cordoning off U.S. funds from any activity related to abortions in violation of the Hyde Amendment. Well, the Mexican rule means that what the Mexico rule means is that if any organization uses funds from any source other than related to abortion or related to abortion, it cannot receive any U.S. assistance, even if 99% of its activities relate to health programs unrelated to programs in a nation where abortion is illegal.
The gentleman's time has
I yield the
expired.
gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
The result will be the absence of health care for millions of women in other nations, as Bill 7 will result for millions of women in our nation. We are seeing 48 hours of reckless disregard for women's health. Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I have 1 minute that I'd like to yield to Mr. LaHood from Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of H.R. 7, the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. Unfortunately, in our nation, the most vulnerable and the most helpless lives amongst us have had their lives ended unceremoniously and tragically through abortion. Since 1973, 57 million lives have been lost to abortion. Even more disheartening, taxpayer dollars have been funding these abortions, despite the fact that polls show that 60% of Americans believe that abortion should not be directly paid for with tax dollars. Since 1976, the Hyde Amendment has saved 2 million lives by prohibiting tax dollars from funding abortions. It's time to make this life-saving amendment permanent and government-wide. If signed by our new president, this measure would do just that. Supporting comprehensive, life-affirming care is a better and more effective way to invest in women's health. I'm thankful for all those that will come to Washington, D.C. this week to March for Life on behalf of the unborn. And as a practicing Catholic and the father of 3, I'm proud to be the voice for the unborn here in Congress. I urge my colleagues to support H.R. 7,